Chapter 244. With enough spiritual jades, Li Mu used the 3 days of rest he had saved to cultivate in seclusion at home. At a certain moment, Li Mu, who was sitting cross-legged on the bed and absorbing the spiritual jades with his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes. He could sense some subtle fluctuations in the array formation outside. Li Mu opened the door and saw Mr. Mei standing outside. He asked in surprise, "Sister Mei, why are you here?" Lord Mei went straight to the point and asked, "Were you the one who added fuel to the fire in the 100 River Academy?" Li Mu had been in seclusion for the past 3 days, so he didn't know anything. He asked, "What happened in the 100 Rivers Academy?" Mr. Mei was puzzled. "It really wasn't you?" Li Mu said, "Tell me what happened first." Lord Mei looked at him in surprise and finally said, "After Jiangzhi's case, in just 3 days the reputation of the 100 River Academy among the people plummeted. After the internal guards investigated, they found that someone was fanning the flames behind the scenes and adding fuel to the fire. Wasn't it you?" Li Mu said, "I've been in seclusion for the past 3 days. This is the first time I've heard of this. Wasn't it His Majesty who sent someone to do it?" Mr. Mei shook his head and said, "No." Li Mu was stunned and asked, "Then who could it be?" The gate of the 100 Rivers Academy was not on the bustling main street, so not many people passed by. But since 3 days ago, there had been more people passing by the gate of the academy. When the people passed by the gate of the 100 Rivers Academy, they all cast disdainful looks at the academy. Some people even secretly spat when no one was paying attention and quickly left. Li Mu and Mr. Mei stood in the distance and watched this scene. The development of the matter was far beyond Li Mu's expectations. Jiangzhi's crime didn't cause any serious consequences, so it shouldn't have escalated so quickly. Someone must have fanned the flames behind the scenes to be able to develop to this point within 3 days. Under normal circumstances, this kind of thing should be decreasing day by day. For this kind of situation to occur, someone must have bought the trending topic. Li Mu thought about it and asked, could it be done by other academies or the new party? Although the Baichuan Academy did not openly support the old party, the students of the academy were the most influential in Great Zhou. Their relationship with the old party was inseparable. Of the 4 great academies, other than the White Deer Academy, the other 3 academies were in a competitive relationship. After all, there was a limit to the number of vacancies in the royal court. If one academy had more vacancies, the other academies would have fewer vacancies. Nobody wanted to be the one with fewer vacancies. The Baichuan Academy was close to the old party, while the Zhou family and the other new party members were eager to get hold of their weakness. They had the most obvious motive. Mr. Mei shook his head and said, "The person behind this is very cautious. The internal guards can't find the source. Even His Majesty couldn't figure it out with his great supernatural powers." She continued, "The Baichuan Academy's behavior of protecting Jiangzhi has already caused public anger in Luoyang. In the morning court today, several imperial censors joined with many courtiers to impeach the Ministry of Justice and the Academy. His Majesty has already ordered the Imperial Censorate to investigate this case." No matter who was behind this, Li Mu had to give him a thumbs up. It seemed that someone had the same idea as him. Instead of doing it secretly, it was better to let them fight each other. It would save Her Majesty a lot of trouble. Mr. Mei shook his head and said, "I almost forgot. I came to see you today for an important matter." She took out a silver waist token and handed it to him. She said, "From today onwards, you are a member of the internal guards." Li Mu looked at the waist token with his name engraved on it and was overjoyed. After being in Luoyang for so long and worrying so much for Her Majesty, he finally succeeded in sneaking into the internal guards. The internal guards were Her Majesty's direct imperial guards. They were only responsible for Her Majesty. This meant that he was one step closer to that big thigh. Mr. Mei continued, "Other than being an internal guard, you have a new job." Li Mu asked, "What job?" Mr. Mei said, "Her Majesty wants you to be the imperial censor in the palace. You will be in charge of checking the officials in the morning court." Li Mu was stunned and asked, "Don't you have to be from the academy to be an official?" Mr. Mei explained, "The officials of the imperial censorate are chosen by the imperial court from each county. They are not afraid of power and are honest and upright. In order to prevent the imperial censors from forming cliques for personal gain, all officials of the imperial censorate cannot be from the academy." Compared to the ability to govern the country, the imperial court valued the character of the imperial censor more. The cleaner the background, the more upright he was. He would be more suitable to be an imperial censor if he dared to speak out and scold other officials. The imperial censor in the palace, as the name suggested, was an imperial censor who worked in the Golden Palace. Their job was to observe the officials in the morning court to see if they were disheveled, lazy, or otherwise impolite. In addition, they had the right to express their opinions on the imperial court. All the officials in the imperial court, no matter their rank, had the right to discuss the imperial court's affairs. Becoming the imperial censor in the palace had little impact on Li Mu's current life. He was still the arrestor of the Luoyang Yamen, but he had to appear in the palace every time he attended the court. He stood in the corner of the palace and observed secretly. Li Mu was confused and asked, "Why did Her Majesty suddenly want me to be an imperial censor?" Mr. Mei said, "Because you are not afraid of the nobles or the academy. She dares to speak out. Her Majesty needs you to speak out in the imperial court." Li Mu nodded and said, "I understand." Baichuan Academy. An old man pointed at Vice President Chen and said angrily, "Are you stupid? You ruined the academy's century-old reputation in order to protect a guilty student. You have to apologize to the academy's past sages." Vice President Chen's face also darkened. He said, "This was originally a small matter. It shouldn't have escalated to this point. Someone must have added fuel to the fire." The old man said angrily, "If you had done things impartially, how could you have been caught?" Vice President Chen said, "I want to know who set us up. This started with the Luoyang prefect Zhang Chun. I have already investigated. Zhang Chun was once a student of the Myriad Scroll Academy. Could this be a trap set by the Myriad Scroll Academy?" The old man said, "This is not important. For now, the most important thing is how to restore the academy's reputation." Even the headmaster, who was in seclusion, was alerted. The headmaster has already ordered Jiang Zhe to be expelled from the academy and Fang Bo to be stripped of his teaching qualifications. No one is allowed to plead for them in the imperial court. Vice President Chen looked regretful. He gritted his teeth and said, "I understand." Ziwei Palace. 3 days ago, the imperial censor was ordered by the empress to investigate Jiang Zhe's case. After 3 days of questioning and investigation, the imperial censor finally found the origin of the case. When Jiang Zhe was listening to music at the Great Music Bar, he was lustful towards a beautiful musician in a private room and wanted to violate her. The musician of the Great Music Bar could not bear the humiliation and cried for help. In the end, other musicians were alerted. They broke into the room and stopped Jiang Zhe. It was not as Jiang Zhe said, that he regretted it during the process of violating the musician. The Ministry of Justice misjudged the case because when Jiang Zhe was being tried in the Ministry of Justice, he had a magic weapon given to him by his teacher, Fang Bo. This magic weapon could keep one awake when one's soul was being controlled, thus misleading the officials of the Ministry of Justice. After Jiang Zhe committed the crime, he refused to confess and misled the Ministry of Justice, causing the case to be misjudged. This caused an extremely bad influence in Luoyang. According to the law, Jiang Zhe was sentenced to 10 years in prison. His cultivation was abolished and he would never be employed again. Behind the curtain, the Empress asked Vice President Chen coldly, "Does the Baichuan Academy have any objections?" Vice President Chen lowered his head and said, "Fang Bo and Jiang Zhe have deceived the imperial court and the academy. The Baichuan Academy has already expelled Jiang Zhe from the academy and stripped Fang Bo of his teaching qualifications. The imperial censor has passed the judgment according to the law. The academy has no objections." The Empress said in a dignified voice, "Jiang Zhe's case has caused a bad influence. The academy cannot escape the blame. This year, the quota for students of the Baichuan Academy to become officials will be reduced by half." Vice President Chen's lips moved, but he did not speak in the end. Such a scandal had happened in the academy. At this moment he had no face to refute. Chapter 245. It was rare for the academy to lower its head in court, but the Empress didn't stop there. The Empress's voice continued to come from behind the curtain. For more than 100 years, all the officials in Great Zhou, from the imperial court to the counties, have been taken over by the academy. From the Baichuan Academy, it can be seen that the students of the academy need to be improved. There are also stubborn problems within the academy. I think it's debatable whether all the officials in the imperial court will be produced by the academy in the future. As soon as the Empress said this, all the officials were shocked. Her Majesty had long wanted to change the status quo of all the officials in Great Zhou coming from the academy. She obviously wanted to use the Baichuan Academy's incident as a pretext to make a fuss. Immediately, a few people stood up and objected. "Your Majesty, you can't do that. The academy was created by Emperor Wen. The four academies have maintained Great Zhou's stability for 100 years. Once it's changed, it will inevitably cause turmoil in the imperial court. Outside Great Zhou, the demon nation is watching covetously, and the ghost realm is not peaceful. The other nations seem to be obedient, but they all have their own agendas. Within Great Zhou there is also a demon sect that often causes trouble. If the imperial court is in turmoil, it will inevitably give them an opportunity. If your majesty insists on doing things your own way, you may cause Great Zhou to fall into a quagmire, and your majesty will also become a sinner. The people who spoke were all from the Baichuan Academy, Qingyun Academy, and Myriad Scroll Academy, including Vice President Chen of the Baichuan Academy. The other two academies were happy to see the Baichuan Academy's reputation being damaged, but in the face of this matter, the three academies maintained a tacit understanding. The Empress didn't respond to the people from the academy. Instead she asked, "What do you think?" The imperial court was silent. Although there were some disadvantages to the academy's existence, on the whole, the advantages definitely outweighed the disadvantages. Since the time of Emperor Wen, the academy had been in existence for 100 years. It had continuously sent talents and played a very important role in maintaining the stability of Great Zhou. Her Majesty wanted to remove the Academy's privileges because she wanted to break the situation in the imperial court and concentrate power in her hands. This would completely overturn the situation established by Emperor Wen. No one could predict the future of Great Zhou. For most of the officials in the imperial court, the position of the Empress did not last long. The throne of the Great Zhou would eventually be handed over to either the Shao clan or the Zhou clan. While the Empress was on the throne, it was not suitable for bold and decisive reforms, which would be detrimental to the stability of the country. After the Empress spoke, none of the officials responded, and the atmosphere in the hall gradually became awkward. This was not the first time such a thing had happened. After all, almost all the officials in the imperial court were from the academy. Even the censors did not want to change the ancestral system that had been passed down for hundreds of years. At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded from the corner of the hall. "Your Majesty is wise." Amidst the silence, a voice suddenly rang out, causing the hearts of the officials to tremble. Who was this audacious person who dared to speak at this time? They all looked at the corner of the hall, and a figure walked out from the corner. "Limu? It's him. Why is he here? Wait, is he wearing the imperial censor robes? Imperial censor? His Majesty made him an imperial censor?" Li Mu met the gazes of the officials and walked out from the corner of the Golden Hall. After someone responded, the Empress asked again, "What do you think, Minister Li?" The way the Empress addressed Li Mu made all the officials in the imperial court dumbfounded. Her Majesty had always addressed the officials in the imperial court as Minister Zhang, Minister Li, and other ministers. When had she ever used Minister Li? This special form of address clearly indicated that this newly promoted imperial censor was a trusted aide of Her Majesty the Empress. Li Mu walked to the center of the hall, cleared his throat and said, "Your Majesty is wise. I also think that the academy system established during the reign of Emperor Wen was a great policy 100 years ago. To a large extent, it changed the chaos of the Great Zhou officials who were not talented and virtuous. In the past 100 years, the Great Zhou has been developing continuously. This system can no longer meet the needs of the imperial court. The atmosphere in the hall was completely different from the past. In the past, if no one responded to the decrees proposed by the Empress, it would be ignored and no officials would discuss it. As long as one official stood out and agreed with the Empress, it was necessary to discuss this topic. The situation in the imperial court was complicated, and no one could predict the future. The officials who could be in the imperial court were all experienced and cunning. No one would risk the Academy's condemnation in order to protect His Majesty and give His Majesty a way out. They had never seen such a bold person. Now they saw it. The people of the Academy naturally would not allow Li Mu to slander the Academy. Vice President Chen said, "You are just an imperial censor. How dare you speak so arrogantly? The Academy has provided so many talents to the imperial court every year. Why can't it meet the imperial court's needs?" "Talents?" Li Mu glanced at him and asked, "A talent like Jiang Zhe, relying on the Academy's background, raped a woman in broad daylight. Is this the talent the Academy mentioned?" This matter had become a pain for the Academy. Vice President Chen said with a gloomy face, "This kind of bastard is just a special case. He can't represent the Academy. The Academy has expelled him and will never hire him again." Li Mu shook his head and said, "Instructor Fang, as an instructor of the Academy, did not set an example and strictly restrain his students. Instead, he allowed Jiangzhe to rape a woman and tried to deceive the imperial court afterward to cover up his crime. If the upper beam is not straight, the lower beam will be crooked. What kind of students can such an instructor teach? If such a student enters the imperial court and becomes an official, how many people will be bullied by him? He said coldly, "The instructor is like this, the students are like this." His Majesty just pointed out the shortcomings of the academy. What right do you have to scold His Majesty as a sinner? Vice President Chen was speechless for a moment, and then immediately said, "Instructor Fang can't represent all the instructors of the academy. You are generalizing." "What about the county magistrate of Yang County?" Li Mu continued to ask. As a county magistrate, he colluded with the local tyrants and exploited the people. He created an unjust case that shook the Great Zhou. Even the heavens couldn't stand it. Which academy did he come from? The vice president of the Myriad Scroll Academy lowered his head slightly. Vice President Chen said, "You are still generalizing. There are 36 counties in the Great Zhou and hundreds of county magistrates. What can a county magistrate of Yang County prove?" Li Mu smiled at him and said, "Okay, let's not talk about the place. Let's talk about Shindu. As far as I know, the county chief of the North County has long disliked the county magistrate of Yang County's actions. He has submitted many memorials, but the evaluation of the county magistrate of Yang County by the Ministry of Personnel every year is A+. Because of this, the county magistrate of Yang County is even more unscrupulous and can do whatever he wants. This kind of corrupt official can be A+, the highest grade. Are the officials sent by the academy to the Ministry of Personnel all blind and deaf?" The Minister of Personnel's face was livid. The faces of the officials of the Ministry of Personnel also alternated between green and white. In front of His Majesty and hundreds of officials, they could only endure being scolded in their noses. This was because what he said was the truth. The county magistrate of Yang County was the brother-in-law of the Assistant Minister of Personnel. The Assistant Minister had personally instructed, so who would dare to make things difficult for him in the evaluation? The officials were silent. Who didn't know about the problems of the Ministry of Personnel? Who didn't know? But the problem was, which Ministry of Personnel wasn't like this in the past dynasties? Most of the officials in the imperial court had their own factions. Wasn't it common for members of the same faction to help and cover for each other? The Ministry of Personnel controlled the evaluation and promotion of officials in the Great Zhou. It was normal for them to give the brother-in-law of the Assistant Minister of Personnel an A+. But in the imperial court, this was the first person who dared to scold the officials of the Ministry of Personnel as blind and deaf. Before this, they all thought that Li Mu was influenced by Zhang Chun of Shindu like boss like subordinate. Only now did they realize that they seemed to have gotten it the other way around. The Minister of Personnel's face was red. He coughed lightly and explained, "This is the dereliction of duty of the Ministry of Personnel. This has already sounded the alarm bell for the Ministry of Personnel. We will reflect on ourselves in the future to reduce such incidents." "Don't give me that." Li Mu waved his hand and said, "Who doesn't know that the county magistrate of Yang County is the brother-in-law of the Assistant Minister of Personnel? This isn't the first time the Ministry of Personnel has done something like this. Why are you still pretending in front of me?" The Minister of Personnel covered his mouth and coughed uncontrollably. He retreated to his seat. The Assistant Minister of Personnel clenched his fists tightly. The veins on his forehead bulged, but he could only lower his head. Many of the officials in the imperial court were dumbfounded. They couldn't help but label Li Mu as a lunatic. Even the strongest imperial censor they had seen was not half as strong as him. He had torn down the veil of the Ministry of Personnel and exposed the officials of the Ministry of Personnel completely naked in front of the other officials. But Li Mu didn't stop there. He pointed around and said, "And the Ministry of Rights, Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Revenue and Taichung Temple. How many officials in the 6 ministries and 9 temples have failed to discipline their sons? You let them do whatever they want in Luoyang and bully the people. Instead of being ashamed, you are proud of it. Don't you know how many times you have protected them?" The Minister of Justice secretly rejoiced. Fortunately, he didn't fight to the death with Li Mu. Instead, he chose to build a good relationship with him. Otherwise, he might have been called out by Li Mu in the Golden Palace like the Assistant Minister of Personnel. Li Mu looked at the people from the academy and said, "These are the talents that the academy sent to the imperial court. Are you going to say that these are special cases? Then you have too many special cases." Vice President Chen and the others were finally speechless. This had just happened in Luoyang. Li Mu's subordinates had beaten up many officials' sons. He even forced the officials involved to change the silver law of substitution. The officials were silent. Li Mu continued, "I won't say more. The officials from the academy have formed cliques in the imperial court and are hostile to each other. Can't you see that?" His loud voice echoed in the Golden Palace. Even the giants standing at the front couldn't help but notice him, because he was too talkative and dared to say it. He had broken the rules that the officials had tacitly agreed to. He had exposed the things that the officials wouldn't normally talk about. He had torn down the veil of the entire imperial court. Throughout history, those who dared to break the rules like this had all died without a complete corpse. Li Mu scanned the faces of the people from the academy one by one and said, "Look at what you have done. His Majesty is wise and has the world in mind, but you only think about your own interests. What right do you have? What right do you have to reprimand His Majesty? Don't you feel ashamed when you reprimand His Majesty?" Chapter 246. There were more than 100 officials standing in the Golden Hall, but it became Li Mu's personal performance. Because it was too quiet, his voice kept echoing in the hall. No one could answer his question. These rules, which had been tacitly agreed upon by the officials, were laid bare in front of them. It was enough to make everyone in the imperial court blush with shame. The officials were silent, and so was the academy. Li Mu continued, talking about the demon kingdom, the ghost realm, the 4 barbarians of the devil sect. These are all excuses. Everyone here knows better than anyone else that the problem of the great Zhou dynasty is not outside, but in the imperial court, in this golden hall. Li Mu's voice echoed, each word piercing the heart. The hall was silent for a long time. Then the Empress's dignified voice came from behind the curtain. "Everyone, please think about Minister Li's words carefully. You may leave the court in an hour." Behind the curtain, footsteps sounded and gradually faded away. The Empress must have left from the back of the hall. After a while, Mr. Mei walked out from the back of the hall. He gave Li Mu a look, and Li Mu followed him out from the back of the hall. Inside the main hall there was silence. The Assistant Minister of Personnel's face was as black as the bottom of a pot. The officials from the 6 ministries and 9 temples who had suffered at his hands did not look too good either. The vice-deans and instructors of the major academies left without a word. The officials looked at each other. The hall was silent for a long time. Then someone sighed and said, "Where did this hothead come from?" After someone spoke, the oppressive atmosphere in the hall exploded. "He really dares to speak. Ha, the 6 ministries and 9 temples and the 4 great academies have all been scolded by him. Even His Majesty has not scolded us like this. With this kind of person as the imperial censor, I'm afraid we won't have a good life in the future. He keeps saying that His Majesty is wise and magnanimous. He just wants to gain favor by protecting His Majesty. Can he be any more obvious? How shameless. I used to think that Zhang Chun was already shameless enough. I didn't expect Zhang Chun to be so much worse than him." The official who spoke did not hide his disgust and annoyance towards Li Mu, but there were also some who were silent and had a thoughtful look on their faces, as if they were really thinking about what he had just said. There was something wrong with the imperial court. They usually turned a blind eye to these problems, but now that it was pointed out, they could no longer ignore it. Li Mu pointed out the problems of the academy, the 6 ministries, the collusion of the officials in the imperial court, and the decreasing psyche power of the people after Emperor Wen. The assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Zhou Zhong, stood in the crowd with a faint smile on his face. Li Mu was not aware of the situation in the hall. He had already left Ziwei Hall. Lady Mei and the Empress' personal maid led him to another hall. There was a table in the hall that was already filled with delicacies. Li Mu was startled and asked, "What is this?" Mr. Mei said, "His Majesty specially asked you to have lunch before you leave." After the morning court session, being able to enjoy lunch in the palace was a privilege that couldn't be any better. Li Mu did not refuse. He was already thirsty from all the saliva flying in the hall. He picked up the flagon on the table, poured himself a full cup and drank it up. It did not seem to be wine in the flagon but some kind of fruit drink. It even contained rich spiritual qi. One sip was equivalent to half a spiritual jade absorbed by Li Mu. After he sat down, he looked at Mr. Mei and the young maid standing aside and said, "Don't just stand there. Sit down and eat with me." Mr. Mei shook his head and said, "You eat. This is a gift from His Majesty." Since they did not want to, Li Mu did not force them. There were many rules in the palace and they must know better than him. Mr. Mei remembered something. He pointed to the young maid and said to Li Mu, "Her name is Shangguan Li. She is His Majesty's personal maid and also one of the commanders of the internal guards. All the internal guards in the palace are under her command. You are on duty in front of the hall, so you are also her subordinate. If you have any problems in the future, you can go to Commander Shangguan. Shangguan Li's initial prejudice against Li Mu had disappeared without a trace. She looked at Li Mu lightly and said, "Just call me boss." Li Mu saluted her with his fists and said, "Greetings, Commander Shangguan." Shangguan Li glanced at him and left. The word boss had a special meaning to him. Li Mu would not call her that casually. This Commander Shangguan was at most a few years older than him, but she also had the cultivation of the fifth realm. It must be because she was the Empress' personal maid. Her Majesty the Empress was so generous. If she could become her personal little jacket, she would definitely receive many benefits. She was able to advance to the creation realm at such a young age. Sooner or later, Li Mu would replace her position and become the Empress' closest jacket. Mr. Mei walked to Li Mu's side and asked, "Do you have any conflicts with Ali?" Li Mu shook his head and said, "It was the first time I saw her. But before the morning court, she looked at me with an unfriendly gaze." Lord Mei knew the reason and said, "Maybe it's because you weren't familiar with each other at that time. You're all His Majesty's internal guards and you're his subordinate. You'll get to know each other better in the future." After Shangguan Li left, the atmosphere in the hall became much better. Li Mu smiled and said to Lady Mei, "Sister Mei, why don't you sit down and eat with me? I can't finish all these by myself. Besides, I have some questions to ask you. It's not convenient for us to talk if you're standing and I'm sitting." Mr. Mei had to sit down and asked, "What questions do you have? Ask away." Li Mu remembered the scene in the court where the Empress was alone and helpless. He asked, "Doesn't Her Majesty have her own confidants in the court?" Mr. Mei said, "Since the time of Emperor Wen, all the officials in the Great Zhou, except for the Imperial Censor, came from the 4 academies. Even the Emperor could not violate the rules set by Emperor Wen. The officials from the 4 academies were united in the court. As long as this rule was not abolished, it would be difficult for Her Majesty to have any confidants. Most importantly, Her Majesty did not want the throne, and she did not want to cultivate any confidants. If it were not for the conflict between the old and new parties, which has affected the psyche power of the people of the Great Zhou and hindered the condensation of the Emperor's qi, Her Majesty would not have cared about them at all. Li Mu remembered that Mr. Mei once said that the Empress did not become the Empress by her own will. She was just a transition for the Zhou family to take over the court. If she really wanted to take power, her strength was enough to suppress the entire court, even with the restrictions of the academies. In this world, all the intrigues and schemes were not worth mentioning in the face of strength. This was also the only reason why the Empress did not encounter any resistance when she inherited the throne, even though her surname was Zhou. Even the Shao royal family acquiesced to it. Li Mu asked curiously, "Does Her Majesty want to pass the throne to the Shao family or the Zhou family in the future?" Mr. Mei shook his head and said, "I'm afraid only Her Majesty knows about this. Let's not ask more." She looked at Li Mu and said, "You are much braver than I thought. Most people can't even stand steadily in front of hundreds of officials for the first time, let alone point at their noses and scold them like you. Just now, you finally helped Her Majesty vent her anger." Li Mu did not care at all. He said, "I have Her Majesty behind me. What am I afraid of?" Mr. Mei patted him on the shoulder and said, "Don't worry. As long as you are loyal to Her Majesty will not mistreat you." Li Mu's protection of the Empress was based on the fact that she would not mistreat him. As long as the Empress did not mistreat him, he could naturally guarantee his loyalty to her. Flattering her in court and protecting her image were all small things. In the future, Li Mu would use practical actions to tell her that as long as he had enough spiritual jade, there were still many things he could do. Li Mu did not finish the delicacies given by the Empress. Before he left, he also brought some fruits and pastries for Xiaobai. Mr. Mei said, "Let me see you out. This place is very close to the West Palace. You can't wander around. If you offend the concubines of the previous emperor, Her Majesty will be in a difficult position." Li Mu was escorted out of the harem by Mr. Mei. When he passed by Ziwei Palace, he happened to see hundreds of officials coming out of the palace. Li Mu was walking behind. When he saw Zhang Chun, he hurriedly said, "Sir Zhang, wait for me." Hearing the familiar voice behind him, Zhang Chun's footsteps quickened. Li Mu quickly caught up with Zhang Chun and said, "Sir Zhang, why are you walking so fast?" Zhang Chun hurriedly said, No, Sir Li, don't call me sir in the future. I can't accept it, really." The imperial censor in the palace was only a 7th rank official. Zhang Chun was now a fifth-rank official. Moreover, Li Mu's identity was only useful during the morning court. Normally he was still a constable in the divine capital. However, since Zhang Chun said so, he did not force him. He said, "Old Zhang, what are you afraid of?" Zhang Chun looked at him and said in shock, "Are you really stupid or are you pretending to be stupid? After what you did in the court, there will be no place for you in the divine capital. You may not be afraid of them, but I'm afraid of being implicated by you." Li Mu said, "I don't need them to tolerate me. I only need Her Majesty to tolerate me." He glanced at Zhang Chun and asked, "Besides, do you think it's useful for you to hide from me now?" Zhang Chun thought carefully and realized that he and Li Mu were grasshoppers in the same boat. He sighed and asked, "You disappeared for so long just now. Did Her Majesty summon you alone?" "No, she didn't." Li Mu shook his head and said, "Her Majesty told me to have lunch in the harem before leaving. I came out after lunch." "Lunch?" Zhang Chun licked his lips and asked, "How's the lunch in the palace? Is it rich? How many dishes are there?" Li Mu said, "It's quite rich. There are more than 30 dishes. The spirit wine is also delicious. One sip and the wine is wrapped in spirit qi." Zhang Chun's throat moved. He turned his head and said, "I heard that the imperial kitchen's cooking is not that good. I still prefer the home-cooked food my wife makes." Li Mu felt the same. He said, "I also like the food my wife makes." Zhang Chun was stunned. "You have a wife?" Li Mu nodded and said, "You met her in Yangqiu County. She's Lady Lu from the Yunyan Pavilion. However, she's still in the North County and won't come to the divine capital until a few days later." Zhang Chun had a deep impression of the beautiful manager of the Yunyan Pavilion. He sighed and said, "Why do all the good things happen to you?" Li Mu was taught and influenced by Li Si. He said, "As long as a girl puts down her face, it's easy to get her." Zhang Chun thought of his performance in the palace and nodded. "You're quite shameless when you're protecting Her Majesty." Then he suddenly thought of something and looked at Li Mu in disbelief. Chapter 247. Zhang Chun suddenly felt that he had unwittingly discovered a huge secret. The Empress had ascended the throne for 3 years, but she had never revealed who she would pass the throne to: the Shao clan and the Zhou clan. One was the original royal family of the great Zhou, while the other was the Empress's maternal family. According to everyone's guess, after the Empress abdicated, either the Shao clan would regain power or the Zhou clan would replace her. The officials in the court would be led by the Shao clan and the Zhou clan, and they would fight for the throne. The only thing they didn't expect was for the Empress to have other plans. Why would Her Majesty pass the throne to the Shao clan? To the Empress, the Shao clan was an outsider and had no blood relations with her. A married daughter was like spilled water. She was no longer a member of the Zhou clan. What good would it do her to pass the throne to the Zhou clan? The Zhou clan's blood relations with her would become weaker and weaker. Who knew what they would think of her in the future? Instead of passing the throne to an outsider, why not give birth to one herself? Wouldn't it be better for her own children to inherit the throne than outsiders like the Zhou clan and the Shao clan? With this bold assumption in mind, Zhang Chun began to speculate. If Her Majesty wanted to pass the throne to her children, what was the biggest obstacle? The Shao clan and the Zhou clan were nothing to be afraid of. Her Majesty herself was a transcendence expert, a 7th realm transcendence expert. She was the strongest existence in the 10 continents. The legendary 8th realm and 9th realm only existed in legends. The 7th realm was the peak of the world. If Her Majesty insisted on having her way, who could stop her from the Shao clan and the Zhou clan? The only thing that could restrain Her Majesty was the Academy. Not only did the Academy have transcendent cultivators, but the officials in the court also came from the Academy. It would be difficult for Her Majesty to subdue them. That was why Her Majesty wanted to weaken the Academy's position in the court, and why she wanted to reduce the quota for the Academy. Connecting the dots, Zhang Chun knew that he had discovered the truth. The last problem was that Her Majesty had no children. Although she was the crown princess and the empress, it was said that the former crown prince liked men and was only husband and wife on the surface. After ascending the throne, Her Majesty didn't establish a harem. Who did she want to have children with? Zhang Chun's gaze involuntarily turned to Li Mu. Her Majesty's love for Li Mu and her meticulous love for Li Mu was something that even he couldn't bear to see. The answer was obvious. Li Mu was the future empress. Li Mu and Zhang Chun walked out of the palace. Along the way, Zhang Chun did not speak. Li Mu thought that he was really frightened. Just as he was about to turn around, Zhang Chun suddenly looked at him with a face full of smiles and asked, "Your Majesty, ah no, Li Mu, to be honest, how do you think this official treats you?" Li Mu then said, "It's all right. What do you mean by okay?" Zhang Chun looked displeased and said, "Back in Yangqiu County, I took good care of you. Now that you've come to the divine capital, you've caused so much trouble for me. Have I ever complained?" "Li Mu, you complain every time. It's not important." Zhang Chun waved his hand and said, "You made a big mistake and offended someone you shouldn't have offended. When have I not cleaned up your mess behind your back? Touch your conscience and tell me, have I not treated you well?" Li Mu touched his conscience and thought carefully. He said, "Sir, you've been very good to me." This was the truth. If it were another superior, Li Mu would have been pushed out to take the blame the first time he caused trouble for him. Zhang Chun finally smiled and said, "If you become rich in the future, don't forget my kindness." Li Mu nodded and said, "Don't worry, I won't forget." Zhang Chun let out a long sigh of relief and muttered, "Whether or not this official can move to a bigger residence, whether or not I can have 8 maidservants to serve me, it all depends on you." Li Mu was stunned and asked, "What?" Zhang Chun waved his hand and said, "Nothing, we'll talk about this in the future." After parting with Li Mu, Zhang Chun did not return to the yamen. Instead he went straight home. Mrs. Zhang was trimming the flowers in the yard. When she saw him coming in, she asked in confusion, "You're not going to the yamen today?" Zhang Chun said, "The morning court was delayed for an hour today. It's almost time for lunch. I'll go back to the yamen after lunch." Mrs. Zhang put down the scissors and said, "You must be tired after standing all morning. Go back to your room and rest for a while. I'll cook." Zhang Chun rolled up his sleeves and said, "I'll help you." Mrs. Zhang shook her head and said, "You'd better rest. The kitchen is so small that it can't accommodate 2 people." Zhang Chun held her hand and said, "Madam, you've suffered. I promise that I'll give you a bigger house in the future. At least 5 rooms. The kitchen must also be big. It won't be crowded for 10 people to stand." Mrs. Zhang patted his hand and said, "Such a big house is enough to live in. Many officials in the court don't even have their own houses." Zhang Chun smiled and said, "In short, madam, just wait and see. One day I'll let you live in a bigger house. In the future there will be maidservants to do the cooking and cleaning. You can be served comfortably by them. Good, good, good. I'll wait for that day." Mrs. Zhang shook her head helplessly and said, "Let's not talk about this first. What do you plan to do about Yi?" Zhang Chun asked, "What's the matter with Yi?" Mrs. Zhang said, "Yi will be 20 next year. She hasn't found a husband yet. You're not worried, but I am. When I was her age, I was already pregnant with her." Zhang Chun shook his head and said, "What's the hurry? In the past, I didn't like any of the people who came to propose marriage. Now that we're in Luoyang, they don't like us." Mrs. Zhang said, "I think that Li Mu under you is not bad. He's handsome and, sure." Before she could finish her words, Zhang Chun covered her mouth. Zhang Chun widened his eyes and looked at her in horror. He said, "Put away your bold idea. Don't mention this in the future. Don't even think about it." Today's morning court session was more than an hour later than usual. When it was dismissed, it was already close to noon. Many officials were like Zhang Chun. After leaving the palace, they did not return to the yamen. Instead, they chose to go home. Most of the officials in the court did not have their own houses in Luoyang. They lived in the government offices and made do with their 2 meals a day. There were also some officials who lived in the North Court, which was not far from the palace. They could have lunch at home. When the assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel returned home, he locked himself in his study with a gloomy expression. The servants in the house did not know what happened. They only heard the sound of porcelain shattering in the study. They guessed that their master must have been angered during the morning court session. They did not dare to approach and only watched from afar. When the director of the Ministry of Justice returned home, he called his son to him and warned him sternly, "Be smart in the future. Don't provoke that Li Mu again. Otherwise, I'll break your legs and make you stay at home for the rest of your life." Yang Xiu shook his head and said, "I won't do it again. Even Minister Zhou died in his hands. I'm afraid he'll strike me with lightning." After saying that, he mustered up his courage and asked, "Did Li Mu do something big again?" The director of the Ministry of Justice said, "It's not just something big." He scolded all the officials in the court like they were his grandsons, but no one dared to talk back. People like him who don't care about their lives should stay as far away as possible from now on. The North Court, where the officials gathered, was usually quiet and secluded. However, at noon, angry curses could be heard from the various officials' mansions. "Damn it. There are so many officials in the court. Is he the only one who's clean?" In order to get the Empress' favor, he doesn't even care about his face. How can there be such a shameless person in the world? In the North Court, the servants in the various officials' mansions vaguely learned something from their master's angry words. They could not help but exclaim in surprise when they discussed it in private. They had lived in Luoyang for so long and worked in the official mansions. They often heard about the court affairs, but they had never heard of such a strange thing. In a restaurant somewhere in Luoyang. In the main hall, two guests were eating and chatting. Have you heard? Something big happened in the court today. How would a vegetable seller like you know about what happened in the court? I heard it from a servant in a high-ranking official's house. They just came out to purchase, so I casually eavesdropped on them. If you hear this, you'll definitely be shocked. Don't keep us in suspense. What happened? Hurry up and tell us. I heard that someone scolded all the officials and even the academy during the morning court. He scolded the academy students and instructors for being immoral. He pointed at the assistant minister of personnel's nose and scolded him for harboring his relatives. He scolded the officials from the 6 ministries and 9 temples for not teaching their children well. He also scolded the officials from the academy for forming cliques for personal gain. How can someone be so bold? Does he not want his head anymore? There really is someone who is so bold. Constable Li even scolded the heavens, let alone the people in the court. It's such a delightful thing. It's a pity that we didn't hear it with our own ears. So it's Constable Li. Then it's not strange. Listening to the conversation between the two, the customers nearby could not help but slow down their speed of picking up food. Their eyes were filled with shock. When they first heard of this, everyone thought it was a groundless rumor. However, when they left the restaurant and realized that there were many people in the divine capital spreading the news, even those who did not believe it at first could not help but believe it a little. Although they only heard about it from the mouths of others, countless people could not suppress the surging passion in their hearts every time they imagined the scene in the morning court. The children of the officials bullied others and the people. They did whatever they wanted, but the people did not dare to speak up. The students of the academy committed serious crimes, but the academy shielded them and released them without charges. The people could only complain in their hearts. The officials in the court formed cliques for personal gain and fought for power. The court was in a mess and the people in the divine capital had no way of making a living. The people could only watch helplessly. It was not that they had nothing to say, but they did not dare and did not have the right to speak. Now, there was finally someone who had the right and was willing to speak up for them. This gave the people of the divine capital a glimmer of hope. Li Mu was the light of the divine capital. The Li residence. Li Mu was feeding Xiao Bai moves. Suddenly he raised his head and looked outside. He felt an extremely powerful psyche power aura from the street in the distance. Chapter 248. That wave of psychokinesis was extremely powerful. Even from such a distance, Li Mu could clearly feel it. He walked out of the house and onto the main street, causing an uproar among the people of the divine capital. It's Constable Li. Constable Li is here. Li Mu was still confused. He didn't understand why there was so much psychokinesis targeting him from the people of the divine capital. Then he realized that it must have something to do with his performance in the morning court. At that time, Li Mu didn't think so much. The scene in front of him could be considered a pleasant surprise. Every time he did something to win the hearts of the people in the divine capital, the psychokinesis of the people would reach a peak in a short time. Li Mu obviously wouldn't waste this rare opportunity. In the next half a day he walked through the streets and alleys and walked through half of the divine capital. At night, when he returned home, Li Mu sat cross-legged on his bed with 2 pieces of spiritual jade in his hands. Under the urging of his psychokinesis, the spiritual power in his body circulated rapidly. The spiritual power in the 2 pieces of spiritual jade was instantly sucked dry and turned into powder. Li Mu didn't sleep the whole night and cultivated until dawn. There was already a lot of spiritual jade powder piled up in front of his bed. After a night of cultivation, Li Mu used up half of the spiritual jade that the Empress rewarded him last time. If he could obtain so much psychokinesis every day and have the support of a steady stream of spiritual jade, it wasn't impossible for him to reach the upper realm before the age of 30. Unfortunately, spiritual jade was hard to find and psychokinesis was even harder to obtain. Only the royal family could take the psychokinesis of the people of the Great Zhou and condense it into Emperor Qi to directly create a 7th realm powerhouse. Even so, this process would take at least 10 years or even decades. In terms of cultivation alone, Li Mu was very close to the peak of the Zhesen realm. However, it wouldn't be easy to break through to the next realm. Some people reached the Jushen realm before the age of 30, but they couldn't achieve remarkable power in their lifetime. In addition to the accumulation of spiritual power, the breakthrough of a major realm also required opportunities. Without a doubt, Li Mu's opportunity was Lu Hanyan. Unfortunately, she was far away in the north region. The two of them were thousands of miles apart. However, even if there was a chance to break through now, Li Mu did not dare to touch it lightly. His mana was growing too fast and his foundation was not stable. It was easy for his inner demons to invade him, and when he was advancing, it was the easiest time for the inner demons to invade him. Before he completely settled the woman in his dreams, Li Mu did not dare to try. Speaking of the woman in his dreams, she had not appeared for a long time. Although Mr. May had told him not to worry and to let nature take its course, Li Mu could not be at ease when it happened to him and was out of his control. It was a pity that he didn't have a chance to meet Her Majesty other than the morning court assembly. Otherwise, he could ask Her Majesty how to suppress and eliminate his inner demons. As a level 7 cultivator, this should be a simple matter for her. Although Li Mu had become an internal guard, he was still quite a distance away from becoming the Empress's personal guard. If he wanted to get more benefits from her, he first had to know what Her Majesty wanted. According to Mr. May, what Her Majesty wanted was the faith of the people in the Great Zhou. She wanted to gather the faith of the people in the Great Zhou's 36 counties and create the next Emperor's Qi as soon as possible. But according to Li Mu's understanding, the thing called Emperor's Qi by the royal family was actually the spirit of faith. It could allow an ordinary person to have the cultivation of the upper realm overnight. It could steal the fortune of heaven and earth and go against the heavens. The difficulty of this was obvious. This required 36 commoners to visit the state temple frequently, and after decades of accumulation, a strand of Emperor's Qi could be formed. The strand of Emperor's Qi that the Empress had was the accumulation of 2 generations of Zhou dynasty emperors for nearly half a century. Now, the Empress had only been on the throne for 3 years, and the next strand of Emperor's Qi was still far away. Li Mu still had a lot of doubts in his heart. As an upper realm cultivator, Her Majesty could do whatever she wanted. If she didn't want to be emperor, she could just not do it. With her strength, no one could force her, unless there was some secret that Li Mu didn't know. These weren't that important to Li Mu. He just needed to know that whatever Her Majesty wanted, he would give her. To obtain a continuous and stable faith of the people, as long as the people of the Great Zhou lived in peace and contentment, lived prosperous lives, and didn't have to worry about not having enough to eat, they would naturally be convinced by the imperial court and Her Majesty. This was simple to say but extremely difficult to do. It was necessary to create a prosperous Great Zhou to win the hearts of the people and shorten the time needed to condense the Emperor's Qi. This was a long-term thing that couldn't be done overnight. The most important thing now was to help Her Majesty get rid of the control of the 4 academies. For more than 100 years, the important officials of the imperial court had all come from the 4 academies, which led to the current situation of the imperial court. The imperial court urgently needed new blood. To change this situation, the imperial court could imitate the imperial examination and independently select talents from the 36 counties outside of the 4 academies. It even required the students of the 4 academies to pass the imperial court's selection exam before they became officials, completely taking back the imperial court's power to select officials. Of course, it wasn't easy to completely change the situation of the imperial court. Jiangzhe's incident only damaged the reputation of the 100 Rivers Academy. Li Mu spoke bluntly in the Golden Palace, but the 4 academies wouldn't give up their power just because of Li Mu's words. The Empress and the 4 academies were in a state of balance. Although this world respected the strong, the imperial court's affairs could never be resolved simply by force, unless Her Majesty could break through to the 8th realm. If she could reach the 8th realm, disbanding the 4 academies would be just a matter of a word from her. There was no need to find any extra reasons. However, she couldn't do this at the moment. Jiangzhe obviously couldn't represent the entire 100 Rivers Academy, and it wasn't enough for Her Majesty to make a move on the 100 Rivers Academy, let alone the other academies. Li Mu couldn't find any other way to break through at the moment. He walked out of the house and prepared to patrol the areas that he didn't have time to patrol yesterday to absorb telekinesis. If he didn't need it for a while, he could store it in his body. In the imperial court, Li Mu found that the few censors of the censorate and a small number of officials in the imperial court had very thick telekinesis. They were all ordinary people who had never cultivated before. Once they started cultivating, this power of thought would allow them to break through several realms in a very short period of time. This speed was even faster than those unorthodox methods that could extract souls and steal souls. As he closed the door and prepared to leave, Li Mu found a carriage parked on the street in front of his house. A hand lifted the curtain of the carriage, and a face that Li Mu wasn't unfamiliar with appeared. When he saw Zhou Zhong, Li Mu's face darkened. He asked, "Assistant Minister Zhou, what brings you here?" Zhou Zhong said, "I'm just passing by and stopped to take a look." Li Mu waved his hand and said, "There's nothing to see here." Zhou Zhong shook his head and said, "I'm not here to see Constable Li. This mansion used to belong to a close friend of mine. I happened to pass by and couldn't help but think of him." Li Mu didn't say anything else and prepared to patrol. At this moment, Zhou Zhong suddenly said, "Do you think you can change anything by making a scene in the imperial court?" Li Mu asked, "What do you mean?" Zhou Zhong laughed mockingly and said, "The current situation in the imperial court has been stable for 100 years. Do you think you can shake the 100 Rivers Academy and force the other academies to give in by punishing Jiangzhe? The 3 academies have more than one Jiangzhe. Do you think you've changed anything? In fact, you haven't changed anything." After mocking Li Mu, Zhou Zhong lowered the curtain of the carriage and it slowly left. Li Mu's face was cold. He resisted the urge to strike him with the heavenly thunder of purple heaven. Indeed, it was satisfying to curse in the Golden Hall, but it couldn't solve any practical problems. Jiangzhe was just a special case. He could only represent himself, not the 100 Rivers Academy. Unless he could catch more Jiangzhe. Wait, what did Zhou Zhong mean when he said that the 3 academies had more than one Jiangzhe? Could it be that Jiangzhe wasn't a special case of the 100 Rivers Academy? Li Mu pondered for a while and gave up the idea of patrolling first. He went to the government office and walked into the duty room where the case files were kept. There weren't many files in the Luoyang government office. Before Li Mu and Zhang Chun came, the Luoyang government office was just a decoration. All the big and small cases in Luoyang were handled by the Ministry of Justice. Soon, Li Mu walked out of the government office and went straight to the Ministry of Justice. The Ministry of Justice. When the director of the Ministry of Justice heard the report, he ran out anxiously and asked, "What brings you here, Lord Li?" Li Mu smiled and said, "Lord Yang, I'd like to see the case files of the Ministry of Justice. Is that okay?" The director of the Ministry of Justice shook his head like a rattle drum and said firmly, No, the Ministry of Justice has a rule that outsiders can't enter the case files of the Ministry of Justice." Li Mu said, "Then can I trouble Lord Yang to check it for me?" The director of the Ministry of Justice hesitated for a moment and asked, "What do you want to check?" Li Mu said, "Similar to Jiangzhe's case, all the case files related to the 4 major academies." The director of the Ministry of Justice immediately said, "No, the case files of the Ministry of Justice were all made by me. Except for Jiangzhe's case, there are no cases related to the 4 major academies." The director of the Ministry of Justice didn't seem to be lying. Li Mu thought carefully. It wasn't that there were no cases related to the 4 major academies, but that the Ministry of Justice didn't dare to accept them. Li Mu smiled at the director of the Ministry of Justice and said, "Most of the cases in the Ministry of Justice are handled by Lord Yang. Even if there are no files, Lord Yang should know something about them." The director of the Ministry of Justice shook his head and said, "There really isn't." Li Mu thought for a moment and said, "Lord Yang, you've been working hard on the cases. The next morning at the court, I'll definitely put in a good word for you in front of all the officials and His Majesty." The director of the Ministry of Justice's heart skipped a beat and cold sweat broke out on his back. This was a threat. This was a naked threat. Li Mu was good at scolding people, but how could he put in a good word? If he was scolded in front of all the officials and His Majesty like the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Personnel, how could he have the face to stay in the officialdom in the future? Li Mu asked again, "I'll ask one last time. Do you have any cases related to the 4 major academies?" The director of the Ministry of Justice swallowed and said, "Yes, we do." Chapter 249. After a while, the director of the Ministry of Justice sent Li Mu off with a smile. He waved his hand and said, "Take care, Lord Li." After sending off Li Mu, the director of the Ministry of Justice returned to his office. He slumped into his chair and sighed, "Why is my life so hard?" As an official of the Ministry of Justice, he was bullied by a constable of the divine capital. He was probably the most wronged director in the history of the Ministry of Justice. Li Mu left the Ministry of Justice and returned to the divine capital. He said to the constables who had just returned from their patrol and were sunbathing in the courtyard, "Come with me. We have work to do." Divine capital, Rosy Lane. There were more than 100 markets in the divine capital. There were business markets, entertainment markets, and residential markets. Rosy Lane was a residential area in the western part of the divine capital. Although it was not comparable to the markets where the southern courtyard and northern courtyard lived, it was still considered prosperous among the hundreds of markets in the divine capital. Most of the people who lived in Rosy Lane were wealthy. Most of the houses in the market had 2 or 3 courtyards. Li Mu came to a house. Wang Wu looked up at the 2 words Su Mansion on the plaque. Without waiting for Li Mu's order, he went up and knocked on the door. After a long time, slow footsteps came from inside. An old man with a wrinkled face opened the door and asked, "Sirs, what's the matter?" Li Mu went up and said, "We're from the divine capital. We're investigating a case and need your cooperation." The old servant opened the door and said, "Sirs, please come in. I'll get the master." Li Mu and the others walked into the courtyard and the old man walked into a room. Soon, a middle-aged man walked out of the room with quick steps. The middle-aged man looked at them in surprise and asked, What case are you investigating?" Li Mu looked at the middle-aged man and asked, "You're shopkeeper Su, right?" The middle-aged man nodded and said, "That's me." Li Mu continued asking, 3 months ago, was shopkeeper Su's daughter violated?" When the middle-aged man heard this, his face was filled with grief and indignation. His voice was hoarse as he said, "We have already decided not to sue you. Why are you still unwilling to let us go?" Li Mu shook his head and said, "Shopkeeper Su, you've misunderstood. We're really here to investigate this case. If you've really been wronged, the imperial court will give you justice." The middle-aged man's face was filled with fear. He shook his head and said, "There is no injustice. My daughter is fine. You can go." The middle-aged man clearly did not trust them. Li Mu sighed and said, "Shopkeeper Su, my name is Li Mu. I'm from the divine capital. You can trust us." The middle-aged man raised his head abruptly and asked, "Luoyang Yamen, you're arrestor Li?" Li Mu took out his waist tag. His name and position were clearly engraved on it. The middle-aged man stared blankly at the token in Li Mu's hand. Even if he stayed in his house and never left, he had still heard of Li Mu's name. When the master's servants went out to buy things, they would often bring back news about Li Mu. For example, he had violently beaten up the sons of officials who bullied the people in Luoyang and forced the imperial court to change the punishment law. Another example was when he struck the people in the street with lightning to seek justice for the victims. He scolded all the officials in the imperial court, and even the 4 academies were not spared. He was not afraid of the nobles or the academies. In Luoyang he was the light in the hearts of the people. The middle-aged man's body trembled as he knelt heavily on the ground. He nodded and said mournfully, "Sir Li, please seek justice for me." Li Mu helped him up and said, "Don't be agitated. Tell me in detail what happened. I'll seek justice for you." 2 lines of tears rolled down from the middle-aged man's eyes. He said in a trembling voice, "Wei Bin, a student of the Baichuan Academy, humiliated my daughter and almost caused her to commit suicide. I went to the Ministry of Justice to complain, but they dismissed me with insufficient evidence. After that, someone even warned me that if I didn't know what was good for me and dared to complain again, they would destroy my family and make me die without a complete corpse. Damn it, there's such a thing. Damn the Ministry of Justice. It's a disaster in Luoyang. Why are these academies filled with beasts?" The constables behind Li Mu were indignant. Li Mu looked at shopkeeper Su and said, "Can I see Miss Su?" Shopkeeper Su nodded and said, "I'll bring Constable Li over. However, after my daughter was humiliated by that beast, she tried to commit suicide several times. Now her mind is not clear and she's afraid of outsiders, especially men." Li Mu looked at the people behind him and said, "Wait for me here." Under shopkeeper Su's lead, Li Mu passed through a moon gate and arrived at the inner courtyard. The scene in the courtyard was a little strange. There was an old tree in the courtyard and its trunk was wrapped in a cotton quilt. The well in the corner was also covered by a stone slab. The stone slab was also wrapped in a thick cotton quilt. Even the stone tables and benches in the courtyard were wrapped in cotton and other things. There was a woman sitting by the stone table. The woman was about 18 or 19 years old. She was wearing a plain dress. Her clothes were neat but a little messy. Her hair was loose and her face was a little dull. Her eyes were empty. When she heard someone approaching, her face was immediately filled with fear. She covered her head with both hands and screamed, "Don't come here! Don't come here!" Shopkeeper Su clenched his fists. His face was full of sorrow and his body could not stop trembling. Li Mu did not approach the woman. He retreated to the outer courtyard and took out a few fulu. He handed it to shopkeeper Su and said, "This talisman can calm the mind. Before going to bed at night, turn it into talisman water and let her drink it. Her condition should be better." Shopkeeper Su drank the talisman water and said repeatedly, "Thank you, Constable Li. Thank you." The only thing Li Mu could do was to calm her mind. Being violated and humiliated had obviously caused great damage to her soul and even affected her mind. She could only rely on her own strength to get over it. The best way for her to get over the knot in her heart was to let her see with her own eyes that those who violated and humiliated her received the retribution they deserved. 100 Rivers Academy, Wei Bin. Li Mu's face darkened as he walked out of the Su mansion. He said, "Let's go to 100 Rivers Academy." Wang Wu and the others followed him without hesitation. They used to be afraid of the academy, but after Jiangzhi's incident, the academy's weight in their hearts had lessened a lot. 100 Rivers Academy. When Li Mu walked to the gate of the academy, the old gatekeeper appeared again. He looked at him angrily and asked, "What are you doing here again?" Li Mu said calmly, "Ask Wei Bin to come out. He's involved in a case and needs to go back with us to the Yamen for investigation." If it was in the past, the old man would not care about a constable of the divine capital Yamen. However, after Jiangzhi's incident, he deeply realized the consequences of ignoring him. He was only a gatekeeper of the academy. This kind of thing should be left to the person in charge of the academy. He glanced at Li Mu and said, "Wait here. I'll go in and report." With that, his figure disappeared into the academy gate. Li Mu and the others stood at the entrance of the academy in their official uniforms. They were particularly eye-catching. Soon, some commoners came up and asked, "Constable Li, what's going on? Did a student of the academy commit a crime again?" Li Mu said, "A student of 100 Rivers Academy defiled a woman. We're going to arrest him." "What? A student of the academy again? How can a student of the academy do such a dirty thing? They're reading books of sages, but they're worse than beasts. What did the instructors of the academy teach them?" The commoners gathered around Li Mu and the others and discussed animatedly. Inside the academy, Vice Principal Chen frowned tightly. He asked in a deep voice, "Whose student is Wei Bin?" A middle-aged man stood out from the group of instructors in front of him and said nervously, "He's my student." Vice Principal Chen asked, "What crime did he commit that the divine capital Yamen would come to the academy to arrest him?" The middle-aged man shook his head and said, "I don't know either." Vice Principal Chen snorted and said, "No matter what crime he committed, the divine capital Yamen wants him. Let them take him away and punish him accordingly. In the future, the academy is not allowed to interfere with the matters of the students." The middle-aged man thought for a while and asked, "But won't this damage the academy's reputation?" "What reputation does the academy have?" Vice Principal Chen waved his hand and said, "His Majesty is still worried about finding a reason to attack the academy. Don't give them any chance. If he wants Wei Bin, give him Wei Bin." Li Mu and the others didn't have to wait for long outside before a young man with a pale face and trembling body was brought out of the academy. A middle-aged man said, "No matter what crime he committed, please punish him impartially. The academy will not protect him." His righteous words improved the impression of the commoners in front of the academy. A student's mistake could not be blamed on the academy. If the academy could uphold justice and not protect him, it could be considered righteous. Li Mu glanced at the young man and said coldly, "Take him away." Wang Wu and the others immediately took him to the divine capital Yamen. At the Wei mansion. "Big brother, bad news. Bad news." The minister-counselor of the Ministry of Revenue finished his meal and was about to go to the Yamen when a figure suddenly rushed into his study with a face full of panic. Looking at his brother, the minister-counselor of the Ministry of Revenue asked, "What happened?" The man panted and said, Wei Bin was arrested and brought to the divine capital Yamen." "What?" The minister-counselor of the Ministry of Revenue had high hopes for his nephew who was studying at the Baichuan Academy. He hurriedly asked, "What crime did he commit? Why was he arrested and brought to the divine capital Yamen?" The man lowered his head and said, He once raped a girl. Now it's exposed and the divine capital Yamen knows about it." The minister-counselor of the Ministry of Revenue said angrily, "Why did you only tell me about this now?" The man said worriedly, "Big brother, what do we do now? He already knows his mistake. The divine capital Yamen won't sentence him to death, right?" "I'm not very clear about the law. I'll go ask Pinger." The minister-counselor of the Ministry of Revenue walked out of the study and into another courtyard. In the middle of the courtyard, Wei Peng was bent over a stone table, reading. Hearing the noise, he turned his head and asked, "Father, second uncle, is there something you need from me?" The minister-counselor of the Ministry of Revenue said, "Peng, you're familiar with the law. What's the sentence for raping a girl?" Wei Peng was stunned and asked, "Why are you suddenly asking this? Did second uncle rape a girl?" The minister-counselor of the Ministry of Revenue said, "Don't ask too much. What's the sentence for raping a girl?" Wei Peng looked at his second uncle with a strange gaze and said, "Raping a girl is a serious crime. According to the law of the Great Zhou, Book 2, Article 36, those who commit the crime of rape are usually sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison. In serious cases, the highest sentence is execution." The man hurriedly asked, "What's considered serious?" Wei Peng shook his head and said, "If the method of rape is too cruel, such as raping the same girl over a long period of time, raping a pregnant girl, a seriously ill girl, or in public, or causing serious injury to a girl, these are all serious cases." The man let out a sigh of relief but still asked worriedly, "What do we do? If that's the case, won't Bin be in prison for more than 3 years?" Wei Peng was shocked and said, "Wei Bin was the one who raped the girl?" The man looked at Wei Peng and a glimmer of hope appeared in his eyes. He said, "Peng, you know the law. You have to help your brother. Even if you can't get him off the hook, you have to make sure he doesn't spend too many years in prison." Wei Peng thought about it and nodded helplessly. "I'll try my best." Chapter 250. Wang Wu and the other 2 constables escorted Wei Bin all the way to the Luoyang Yamen under the watchful eyes of the people. Li Mu searched both the front and back of the Yamen but still could not find Zhang Chun. He asked Deputy Constable Sun, "Where's Lord Zhang?" Deputy Constable Sun said, "I think he went out for some business." Without the Luoyang medallion, Li Mu did not have the authority to investigate the case. He did not know when Zhang Chun would return. Li Mu thought for a while and said to Wang Wu and the others, "Go to the Ministry of Justice. All criminal cases in the 36 counties of the Great Zhou, including the Luoyang, were under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Justice. The Ministry of Justice even had the authority to interfere with local trials. This case was already a hot potato, so it was perfect to leave it to the Ministry of Justice. It did not matter if they were officials or citizens of the Great Zhou, as long as they lived in the Great Zhou, they had the authority to send someone to the authorities, including the Luoyang Yamen and the Ministry of Justice. If the Ministry of Justice did not accept the case, Li Mu, as the censor, would have something to do in the next morning court. The Ministry of Justice. The director of the Ministry of Justice had just rested when a constable knocked on the door and walked in. He said with a bitter face, "Sir, Li Mu is here again." The director of the Ministry of Justice's head buzzed. He grabbed his hair and said in frustration, "Didn't I tell him? Why is he here again? How can he bully people like this?" The constable said, "He caught a student from the academy." The director of the Ministry of Justice felt his head swell. He was about to sneak out from the back door when Li Mu appeared in his sight. He said with grief and indignation, "Sir Li, didn't we agree to take him to the Luoyang Yamen?" Li Mu looked at him, sighed and said, "Lord Yang, you are so silly. I gave you this opportunity because of our friendship in the past. If you don't want it, you can't blame me for what happens next." Their past friendship was **T. The director of the Ministry of Justice cursed in his heart but still asked, "Sir Li, what do you mean?" Li Mu said, "According to the victim of this case, he complained to the Ministry of Justice as soon as the case happened. However, not only did the Ministry of Justice not accept the case, you dismissed him with the excuse of insufficient evidence. After the case, you even threatened his family, saying that if he sued you again you would kill him." The director hurriedly said, "The Ministry of Justice did not threaten him. The Ministry of Justice never do such things. Who would believe that?" Li Mu looked at him with great pity and said, "This case has attracted widespread attention of the people. People will only think that all this was done by the Ministry of Justice. In the end, this matter will become more and more serious, and the consequences will become more and more serious. Do you think you can escape from it, Lord Yang? When the time comes, who do you think will be pushed out by the Ministry of Justice to take the blame? Who do you think will be the minister, the assistant minister, or you, official Yang? I'm giving you a chance to make up for your mistakes on account of your help. If you don't want it, I'll bring him back to the fairy's capital." Wait. Under Li Mu's persuasion, the director of the Ministry of Justice had understood and hurriedly spoke. Li Mu had completely enlightened him. Once the case became big, the Ministry of Justice would be held responsible. The position of the director of the Ministry of Justice was neither big nor small. It was just right for him to take the blame. If he did not do something to make up for it, he would most likely lose his position. He might even be imprisoned. He clasped his fists to Li Mu and said, "Sir Li, thank you for reminding me. I will remember your kindness." "You're welcome," Li Mu nodded and said, "In that case, let's start the trial as soon as possible." The director of the Ministry of Justice walked out of the office and saw Zhou Zhong coming out from the opposite side. He asked nervously, "Sir Zhou, the academy student committed a crime. Do you want to interrogate him yourself?" Zhou Zhong waved his hand and said, "Go ahead. I'll just listen." His gaze swept past Li Mu and then left calmly. There was a commotion in the front yard of the Ministry of Justice. The Minister-Counselor of the Ministry of Revenue, Wei Bin's father, and Wei Peng had just arrived from the Luoyang Yamen. The Minister-Counselor of the Ministry of Revenue saw the Director of the Ministry of Justice and immediately said, "Sir Yang, please wait." The Director of the Ministry of Justice turned and asked, "Sir Wei, why are you here?" The Minister-Counselor of the Ministry of Revenue sighed and said, "Wei Bin is my nephew." The Director of the Ministry of Justice was surprised. Then he shook his head and said, "If Sir Wei is here to plead for Wei Bin, then I'm sorry. This case has attracted a lot of attention. I can't be biased." The Minister-Counselor of the Ministry of Revenue shook his head and said, "Of course not. Wei Bin is guilty. I just want to listen." The Director of the Ministry of Justice nodded and said, "Yes, but Sir Wei's identity is special. You can only listen outside the court." The Minister-Counselor clasped his fists and said, "Thank you, Sir Yang." Then he said, "Can we have a few words with Wei Bin?" The Director of the Ministry of Justice hesitated and said, "This?" At this moment, Zhou Zhong said from afar, "Don't take more than half an hour." The Minister-Counselor of the Ministry of Revenue was grateful and said, "Thank you, Sir Zhou." The three of them walked to Wei Bin's side. Wei Bin's face was pale and he said in panic, "Uncle, father, save me." The Minister-Counselor of the Ministry of Revenue was angry and said, "Bastard, I didn't send you to the academy to rape women. Now you know fear. Why didn't you know when you were doing evil?" Wei Bin's father hurriedly said, "Now is not the time to talk about this. Bin, from now on remember every word your brother says. Later in the court you will do as your brother says. That way you will receive the lightest punishment." Wei Bin nodded and said, "I will not speak carelessly." Wei Peng looked at him and asked, "Did you really do this?" Wei Bin nodded and said, "It was me." Wei Peng asked again, "Did you use violence during the process?" Wei Bin shook his head and said, "No, we only started after she was unconscious." Wei Peng was stunned and asked, "We?" Wei Bin said, "I wasn't the only one who did this." Wei Peng thought for a while and said, "Got it. Later, no matter what the sir asks, as long as you did it, just admit it. If you confess, you can fight for a reduced sentence. After that, you can confess to all the people who committed the crime with you. This can be considered a meritorious service. It is very likely that your sentence will be reduced to less than 3 years." After a while, the Director of the Ministry of Justice walked forward and asked, "Are you done?" The Minister-Counselor of the Ministry of Revenue said, "I'm done. Thank you, Sir Yang." The Director of the Ministry of Justice walked to the court and asked for instructions from the Minister-Counselor of the Ministry of Justice. He said in a low voice, "Begin the court." Wei Bin was brought to the court. The Director of the Ministry of Justice sat at the top. Li Mu and the Minister-Counselor sat on his left and right to listen to the trial. The Director of the Ministry of Justice patted the gavel and said, "Men, summon the Sioux woman to the court." Li Mu raised his head and said, "Sir Yang, the Sioux woman has been defiled by Wei Bin. Her body and mind have been injured. She is afraid of seeing strangers and is not suitable to be brought to the court. Directly interrogating Wei Bin is enough." The Director of the Ministry of Justice thought for a while and nodded. "Sir Li is very considerate." He patted the gavel again and looked at Wei Bin. He asked, "Wei Bin, do you admit your crime?" "Your student admits his crime." Wei Bin immediately knelt down and spilled the beans. 3 months ago, on the night of the 6th day of the 2nd lunar month, your student tricked Su Yao to an inn and drugged her, then violated her. The Director of the Ministry of Justice was stunned. He did not expect Wei Bin to confess so quickly. He did not even ask anything and Wei Bin had already confessed everything. He quickly recovered and said, "Since you have confessed, then according to the 36th article of the 2nd book of the Law of Great Zhou, the punishment for raping a woman is between 3 and 10 years in prison. That woman was injured physically and mentally because of your rape. I now sentence you to 7 years in prison." Your Excellency, please wait. Wei Peng stood outside the court and loudly said, although Wei Bin is guilty, he did not use violence or coercion. Moreover, he confessed his crime on his own initiative. According to the law, Your Excellency should be given a lighter sentence. The director of the Ministry of Justice frowned. Do I need you to teach me how to judge a case? If you dare to disturb my judgment again, you will be punished for disturbing the court. At this moment, the Assistant Minister of Justice, Zhou Zhong, calmly said, although Wei Bin is a criminal, he still has the right to defend himself. Wei Peng, if you have anything else to say to defend Wei Bin, come to the court and say it. The Minister-Counselor of the Ministry of Revenue looked at the Assistant Minister of Justice with a grateful expression. He pushed Wei Peng and said, why aren't you going up? Wei Peng walked up to the court and raised his head. Apart from rape, Wei Bin's actions did not cause any other serious consequences. According to the law, he should be given a lighter sentence. The director of the Ministry of Justice glanced at Zhou Zhong. Seeing that he did not say anything, he felt somewhat uncertain. He then looked at Li Mu. Seeing that his expression was also calm, he finally decided to act according to the law. He did not favor Wei Bin, nor did he intentionally increase his punishment. If he acted according to the law, no one could blame him, right? The director of the Ministry of Justice cleared his throat and looked at Wei Peng. What you say makes sense. In view of Wei Bin's voluntary confession, I will give you a lighter sentence and sentence you to 5 years in prison. Outside the court, the Minister-Counselor of the Ministry of Revenue and Wei Bin's father let out a sigh of relief. At this moment, Wei Peng struck while the iron was hot. Sir, please wait. There are still some hidden facts to this case. Wei Bin has already confessed that apart from him, there were also the 100 River Academies Jiangzhi Jiyun, Songzhou and Yikang. According to the laws of the Great Zhou, the main culprit exposing the accomplices is a great merit and can be reduced or exempted from punishment. Although the crime of rape cannot be exempted, it can be reduced by at least 3 years. Hearing this, the director of the Ministry of Justice was stunned. This Wei Peng seemed to be very familiar with the law, but did he not know the difference between rape and rape? Rape of a woman was generally punished with 3 to 10 years in prison. Rape of a woman was extremely vile. The main culprit would be sentenced to at least the death penalty and could not be reduced. This law had been amended by Assistant Minister Zhou 5 years ago. Could it be that Wei Peng was looking at the unamended law of the Great Zhou from 5 years ago? Li Mu left his chair and walked up to the court. Under Wei Peng's somewhat frightened gaze, he patted his shoulder and said, listen to my advice. In the future, if there's nothing important, don't contact your second uncle's family. Chapter 251. Wei Peng looked at Li Mu in confusion, not knowing what was going on. The director of the Ministry of Justice came back to his senses and looked at Wei Bin again. He asked, are you saying that other than you there was someone else who raped the girl that night? Did you gang rape her? The sentence had been reduced from 7 years to 5 years. Wei Bin nodded repeatedly and said, there was also Jiangzhi Jiyun, Songzhou and Yikang. There were 5 of us. The director of the Ministry of Justice rubbed his forehead and began to realize the seriousness of the matter. Gang rape with more than 2 people had already exceeded the limit of a 10-year sentence. Gang rape with 5 people was the worst type of crime. It was unpardonable, and there was no doubt that the main culprit would be sentenced to death. Even the important accomplices would not be able to escape death. It was nothing more than sentencing Wei Bin to death. Among all the death sentences, death by beheading was undoubtedly the lightest. Worse than death by beheading, there were also dismemberment by 5 horses, death by 1,000 cuts, and even torture against the soul. Just thinking about it made one shudder. Wei Bin was a member of the academy after all. He did not know what to do. He looked at the assistant director of the Ministry of Justice and gave him a questioning look. Zhou Zhong stood up and said, just sentence it as it should be. The director of the Ministry of Justice took a deep breath and looked at Wei Bin again. He asked, who came up with the idea of gang raping the girl? Wei Bin said, it was Jiangzhi. The director of the Ministry of Justice continued to ask, who tricked the girl into going to the inn? Wei Bin said, it was me. It was Ji Yun who drugged her. Sir, I've already confessed. Can I not go to jail? The director of the Ministry of Justice sighed and said, you don't have to go to jail. Wei Bin's face lit up with ecstasy. Really? Wei Bin's father also looked happy. As an official, the director of the Ministry of Revenue instinctively felt that something was wrong. Wei Peng's face was full of disbelief. Once a woman was raped, there was no way to escape punishment. How could Wei Bin not have to go to jail? At this moment, the director of the Ministry of Justice continued, according to the 36th article of the second volume of the Law of Great Zhou, Wei Bin, Jiangzhe, and Ji Yun, as the main culprits of the gang rape case, are sentenced to death. The others are to be sent back to the Yamen for trial. Wei Bin was stunned for a moment and the smile on his face froze. He suspected that he had heard wrongly. His sentence had clearly been reduced from 7 years to 5 years. How did it suddenly become a death sentence? Wei Bin's father rushed to the court and said in shock, "Lord, how could this be? You can't judge him like this. You can't judge him like this," Wei Peng cried out loudly. "My lord, this is against the law." The director of the Ministry of Justice ordered one of the bailiffs, "Show him the Law of Great Zhou from our Yamen." The bailiff left the court and soon came back with a thick book and handed it to Wei Peng. As soon as he held the book, Wei Peng felt that it was completely different from the Law of Great Zhou that he had been reading these days. This book was slightly heavier and thicker than the ones he had been reading. The pages also looked like they needed to be updated. The pages of his Law of Great Zhou were already yellowed. He skillfully flipped to the second volume and sure enough he found an additional explanation after that law. Under the crime of rape, if there were 2 or more people taking turns, the punishment would be severe. If there were 5 or more people taking turns, the main offender and important accomplices would be executed at the very least. Wei Peng's body trembled, and the Law of Great Zhou in his hand fell to the ground. All this time he had been studying the outdated law, forgetting to eat and sleep. His face was filled with grief and indignation as he lamented, "Yang Xiu has wronged me." Li Mu returned to his position. At this point in the investigation, Wei Bin, Jiangzhe, and the other 2 could not escape death. Even if Wei Bin was willing to plead guilty, it could not change this fact. Whether he was willing to plead guilty or not, the Ministry of Justice could easily obtain the complete truth from him. Apart from Wei Bin and Jiangzhe, there were 3 more people from the 100 Rivers Academy that needed to be arrested. Li Mu walked to the director of the Ministry of Justice and said, "There are 3 more criminals from the 100 Rivers Academy. I know that Lord Yang is afraid of the academy. My divine capital Yamen will help you capture this person. What do you think, Lord Yang?" The director of the Ministry of Justice was worried about this matter. When he heard this, he said happily, "That's naturally the best." Li Mu walked past Wei Bin and the others and strode out of the Ministry of Justice. He said to Wang Wu and the others who were waiting outside, "Let's go back to the 100 Rivers Academy." The group of people returned to the 100 Rivers Academy from the Ministry of Justice. Along the way they were surrounded by people. "Bastards. The academy has taught a bunch of bastards. Calling them bastards is an insult to bastards. They are worse than bastards. What's the point of an academy like this existing? It's better to disband it." After learning about the atrocities of the academy students from Wang Wu and the others, the crowd was immediately enraged. They rushed toward the 100 Rivers Academy in a mighty manner. The higher the academy's status in the hearts of the people, the worse the fall would be when they fell from the altar. In the past, no one in the divine capital dared to reprimand the academy. During this period of time, Li Mu had undoubtedly become the spiritual leader of the people. Li Mu could also clearly feel the people's love and faith in him. This kind of love and faith was difficult to form but easy to collapse. From beginning to end, he had to stand on the side of justice. At the entrance of the 100 Rivers Academy, the old man appeared and said angrily, "Wei Bin has already been given to you. What are you doing here?" Li Mu said indifferently, "Wei Bin has already confessed a few of his accomplices. They are called Ji Yun, Songzhou and Yi Kong. Come out and go to the Ministry of Justice for trial." The old man's expression froze. He keenly sensed the danger. In just half a month, the academy had already had 5 students tied up in court. Although this was nothing to the hundreds of students in the 100 Rivers Academy, it was a bad start. He quickly returned to the academy and reported this matter to the vice president. Vice President Chen's entire face was dark. He said gloomily, 3 more. Get those 3 bastards to come see me." Not long after, Ji Yun, Songzhou and Yi Tsong were summoned. The 3 of them seemed to have known what would happen. They lowered their heads and said nothing with pale faces. Vice President Chen said angrily, "What did the 3 of you do? Tell me honestly." The 3 of them shuddered for a moment before they told him everything that had happened. "Gang rape?" Vice President Chen looked at them in a daze. A moment later he laughed loudly. Good. These are the good students that my 100 Rivers Academy has taught." Jiangzhe's case did not cause any serious consequences, but it was different this time. The academy was established because the quality of Great Zhou's officials was uneven at that time. Emperor Wen ordered people to establish the academy and recruit students with clean backgrounds. He had them study the books of the sages in the academy and cultivate their virtue. At the same time, he had them learn how to rule a country, divine abilities and spells to protect a region. Unexpectedly, 100 years later, the students of the academy, the future officials of Great Zhou, became criminals of gang rape. Vice President Chen waved his hand and said, "Send them out and expel them from the academy. The Ministry of Justice can deal with them however they want." When the three of them heard this, their expressions changed drastically. "No, Vice President. Vice President, save us. Vice President, we know our mistakes. We won't dare to do it again." Vice President Chen shook his head and said, "If admitting your mistakes can atone for your crimes, then what's the use of the law? The academy did not teach you how to be a good person. It's the Vice President and the instructor's fault. Today I'll teach you one last principle. You have to bear the consequences of your own mistakes." Ji Yun, Song Zhou, and Yi Tsong were sent out with their hands tied behind their backs. This time, the people of the 100 Rivers Academy did not say anything. Not long after, in the Ministry of Justice's court. Apart from Jiang Zhe, who was already in the Ministry of Justice's prison, Ji Yun, Song Zhou, Yi Tsong, and Wei Bin were all kneeling in front of the court. "Damn you, Wei Bin. Didn't you say you wouldn't rat us out? If I knew this day would come, I wouldn't have believed you. You can't escape, so you want to drag us down with you?" Ji Yun, Song Zhou, and Yi Tsong looked at Wei Bin, who was kneeling in a daze in the court. It was as if his soul had left his body. Wei Bin's eyes were lifeless. He knelt there in a daze as if his soul had been taken away. Wei Peng's reaction was not any better. He stood outside the court with a blank expression. Initially, the Minister of Justice had already sentenced Wei Bin to 7 years of imprisonment. Wei Bin only needed to lose 7 years of freedom, and after he was released he would still be able to enjoy a luxurious life. However, after his defense, Wei Bin's 7 years of imprisonment was turned into a death sentence. He had no idea how to face his uncle's family. Wei Bin's father was on the verge of collapsing. He shook Wei Peng's shoulder and said, "Give me back my son, give me back my son." Chapter 252. Bang. The Minister-Counselor of the Ministry of Revenue knocked his brother unconscious and ordered his 2 attendants, "Take him back." Wei Peng looked at the Minister-Counselor of the Ministry of Revenue. His lips moved and he said with difficulty, "Father." The Minister-Counselor of the Ministry of Revenue shook his head and said, "This is his fate. It has nothing to do with you." Zhou Zhong walked out of the court and said to the Minister-Counselor of the Ministry of Revenue, "I have done my best." From the moment they stepped into the Ministry of Justice, the Assistant Minister of Justice, Zhou Zhong, had been making things easy for them. He had even made an exception and allowed Wei Peng to defend himself in court. The Minister-Counselor of the Ministry of Revenue clasped his fists and said, "I will remember Lord Zhou's kindness and will repay it in the future." Zhou Zhong looked at Wei Peng and a strange light flashed through his eyes. He said, "Minister-Counselor Wei's son is a promising talent. If he can enter the academy, his future achievements will be even greater than yours." The Minister-Counselor of the Ministry of Revenue had only recently discovered that his son, who he had thought was destined to not have any great achievements, had a keen sense of the law. However, at that moment his thoughts had changed. He said politely, "My son's talent is dull and was once rejected by the academy. But Wei Bin was chosen by the academy. Unfortunately, Sai, this may be the fate of the Wei family." Zhou Zhong only glanced at Wei Peng and said, "This copy of the law of the Great Zhou is for you." Wei Peng's expression was absent-minded. He mechanically raised his head to look at Zhou Zhong and murmured, "Thank you, Lord." In the court, the director of the Ministry of Justice had already asked about the ins and outs of the case. In this rape case, Wei Bin was undoubtedly the main culprit, and Jiang Zhe and Ji Yun were important accomplices. According to the law, these 3 people would be executed. The other 2's crimes were lighter, but they could only keep their lives. They had to spend the rest of their lives in prison and do heavy labor. As students of the academy, they should have had the brightest future. In the future they would have had a great chance like him to enter the court and wield power. Unfortunately, they had developed evil thoughts in their hearts and acted on them. More importantly, when they met Li Mu, their lives had taken an irreversible turn. He glanced at the 4 people kneeling in front of the hall and said, "Go to the prison and bring Jiang Zhe here." Jiang Zhe had been sentenced to 10 years in prison for attempted rape. He was still in the prison of the Ministry of Justice. After a few days, another crime he had committed had been dug up. Execution was the lightest punishment, and it would save a lot of food for the imperial court. The prison of the Ministry of Justice. Jiang Zhe leaned against the wall, wearing a white prison uniform. His face was dirty, his hair was messy, and his expression was dull. He did not look as handsome as he did in the academy. After the attempted rape was exposed, not only was his reputation ruined, but he was also expelled from the academy. One day he was still a high-spirited student of the academy. The next day he became a prisoner of the Ministry of Justice. Even his cultivation had been crippled. Right now he didn't have any magic power left in his body. His dantian was broken, so he couldn't cultivate again. Even in this dark prison he couldn't stay for long. Other than having his freedom restricted, he still had to do heavy labor. He wanted to go out, he wanted to go back to the academy, and he wanted to enjoy all kinds of women. However, this was just an extravagant hope. His only hope was that after 10 years, when his imprisonment was over, even if he couldn't enter the imperial court as an official, he could rely on his family's wealth to resume his previous life. These days, he had been comforting himself with this thought. Suddenly he heard footsteps. A jailer opened the door and said to Jiang Zhe, "The Lord summons you. Come with us." Jiang Zhe was stunned. He immediately jumped up and asked loudly, "Did the academy uphold justice for me? I don't have to go to prison anymore?" The jailer nodded and said, "No, you don't have to anymore." There was nothing to investigate about Wei Bin's case. He had confessed everything at the beginning. Later, the Ministry of Justice performed a soul search on them and completely confirmed their crimes. Wei Bin, Jiang Zhe, and Ji Yun were sentenced to death because they were the main culprits and accomplices of serious crimes. The other two could forget about getting out in this lifetime. When the verdict was announced, countless people clapped their hands and cheered. Even the notorious Ministry of Justice was praised by the people, which was rare. Of course, the one who benefited the most was Li Mu. He was the one who redressed the grievances of the Su family's woman. He was also the one who brought Wang Wu and the others to the academy to arrest the people. The invisible psyche power in his body was so dense that it was almost tangible. It laid a solid foundation for his cultivation in the future. It was worth mentioning that Wei Peng, the son of the minister-counselor of the Ministry of Revenue, had changed his usual playboy ways. The story of him putting righteousness before family began to spread among the people. It was said that the Ministry of Justice's initial sentence for Wei Bin was 7 years in prison. Later, Wei Peng felt the misery of the Su family's woman. In the court of the Ministry of Justice, he defended Wei Bin with all his might. Finally, Wei Bin's sentence of 7 years in prison was changed to a death sentence. The prodigal had turned over a new leaf. Many people no longer harped on Wei Peng's past bullying of the people. They regarded him as a role model for playboys in Luoyang. Outside the east gate of Luoyang, the director of the Ministry of Justice grabbed a few sticks from the pot and threw them out. He said in a deep voice, "The time has come. Carry out the execution." The executioner raised his broadsword. With a flash, the heads of Wei Bin, Jiang Zhe, and Ji Yun fell to the ground. Their souls scattered. Beside Li Mu, a woman with a dazed face looked at the 3 rolling heads. She suddenly burst into tears. She cried heartbrokenly. Shopkeeper Su hugged her. The man could not help but cry out as well. He comforted her, "My poor Yao Yao. It's okay. It's okay. The villains who harmed you are all dead. They're all dead." Seeing her cry so sadly, Li Mu was relieved. She was humiliated by Wei Bin and the others. Her mind was badly damaged and she had sealed her heart. No fulu or elixir could cure her. That was why Li Mu asked shopkeeper Su to bring her here to watch the execution. When she saw the 3 people being executed, the knot in her heart was untied. Shopkeeper Su pulled her to kneel on the ground and kowtowed 3 times. He said gratefully, "Constable Li, I can't repay your kindness. If you have any orders in the future, I'll do it even if I have to go through a mountain of swords or a sea of fire." The woman also cried, "Thank you, Constable Li, for upholding justice for me." Li Mu helped them up and said, "You're welcome. It's my duty. What do you plan to do next?" Shopkeeper Su said, "I want to send Yao Yao to her grandmother's house and let her rest for a few days." Li Mu thought about it and said, "That's fine." After all, Luoyang had left too many painful memories for her. A temporary change of environment would be good for her recovery. They did not have to worry about the revenge of the academy or the Wei family. This case was different from the case of Xiaoyu in Yang County. Wei Bin's case had attracted too much attention in Luoyang. The academy and the Wei family had better pray that nothing happened to them. Once something happened to the father and daughter of the Su family, even if it was not their fault, everyone would blame them. After returning from the execution ground, Li Mu opened the door. Xiao Bai ran out of the kitchen wearing an apron and said, "Benefactor, please wait a moment. The food will be ready soon." Seeing the bloody scene on the execution ground, Li Mu still felt depressed when he came back. However, when he saw Xiao Bai's smiling face, his depression disappeared without a trace. Li Mu walked into the kitchen and said, "Let me do the rest. After dinner I'll teach you Taoism." After the demon clan transformed, they could learn the Taoism and Abhijna of the human clan. In addition to their strong bodies, they could often suppress human cultivators if their Dharma powers were not too different. Xiao Bai had already transformed for some time. She had an endless supply of spiritual jades for cultivation and her Dharma powers were growing rapidly. It would not be long before she grew a fourth tail and condensed a demon pill. Li Mu knew that he was the only person Xiao Bai could rely on now. He had never been stingy when it came to Xiao Bai. Whether it was defensive or offensive Dharma treasures, she had the best. She even had a lot of powerful earth-rank Fulu. She had an endless supply of spiritual jades for cultivation. Li Mu had also taught her the Buddhist incantation of 9 words. Now she looked like a 3-tailed spiritual fox. However, in a real fight she could suppress a 4-tailed demon fox and a 4th-realm human cultivator. Even if Li Mu was not by her side, she could still protect herself to a certain extent. Of course, in Li Mu's eyes this was far from enough. Putting aside the fact that she still had to avenge her grandmother and her entire clan, in order to stand firmly behind the Empress, he had already offended all the people and forces that he could and could not afford to offend in the deity's capital. Even if he was being targeted now, he still could not figure out who was behind it. The 6 ministries and 9 temples, the academy, the Zhou family, the Shao clan, it was all possible. They could not find a way to break through Li Mu. It was inevitable that they would attack those around him. Especially what Li Mu was about to do next, it would completely offend the academy. He did not care about himself, but he had to consider Xiao Bai's safety. After tomorrow's morning court, he planned to ask the Empress for a heaven-rank Fulu for protection. If the Empress did not give it to him, Li Mu would have to reconsider their relationship. He had offended so many people for her and was in great danger. As Li Mu's only backer, if she did not even care about Li Mu's safety, then it would be difficult for him to work for her in the future. Chapter 253. In the Ziwei Palace. Although the 100 Rivers Academy was highly respected and had sent countless officials to the imperial court for more than 100 years, its reputation in Luoyang had plummeted due to the recent events. Led by the censorate, more than a dozen officials presented their reports in the morning court. They pointed out that the 100 Rivers Academy was not strict in teaching and that the students had committed crimes. The purpose of the establishment of the academy was to improve the quality of the officials and to benefit the people. It was hard to imagine that the students of the academy had repeatedly raped women. If such a person were to enter the imperial court in the future, wouldn't it be a disaster for the people of the Great Zhou dynasty? Before the scandal broke out in the academy, the vice principal or instructor of the Baichuan Academy liked to make impassioned remarks in the morning court. After Wei Bin, Jiangzhe, and the others were exposed, they never appeared in court again. The officials from the Qingyun Academy and the Myriad Scroll Academy naturally wouldn't defend the 100 Rivers Academy. For a time, there was a rare situation where the officials accused the academy. Of course, the actions of individual students couldn't implicate the entire academy. The Empress only ordered the 100 Rivers Academy to restrain the students and prevent such incidents from happening again. After the morning court ended and the officials left, Li Mu was still in the palace. Mr. Mei walked over and asked, "Is there anything else?" Li Mu said tactfully, "In the past 2 months, in order to help Her Majesty clean up the evil tendencies in Luoyang and unite the people, I've offended all the officials and nobles in Luoyang and even the academy. What if they attack me behind my back?" Mr. Mei comforted him. "Don't worry. If they dare to attack you in Luoyang, they won't be able to hide it from Her Majesty. No one has the guts." Li Mu said, "It's better to be safe than sorry." Mr. Mei understood Li Mu's intention and said helplessly, "I'll ask Her Majesty." She left the palace and soon came back with a Fulu in her hand. Li Mu wasn't good at writing talismans, but he was knowledgeable. The Fulu's spiritual power was restrained and looked ordinary, but it gave Li Mu a familiar feeling. The golden armor talisman gave him the same feeling. Obviously this was a heaven-rank Fulu. Mr. Mei handed the Fulu to Li Mu and said, "His Majesty gave this to you. Keep it with you. When you are in danger you don't need to activate it. It will protect you." This talisman can block a cultivator of the sixth realm for a moment. Once it is activated, His Majesty will be able to sense it immediately. The Empress was still as generous as ever. This way Xiao Bai's safety would be guaranteed. Li Mu accepted the fulu and said, "Please thank His Majesty for me." Mr. Mei rolled his eyes at him and said, "You are the only one who can ask for a reward from His Majesty." Li Mu felt that there was nothing wrong with his way of doing things. In his heart, the relationship between him and the Empress was not that of a monarch and his subject, but that of a boss and an employee. The premise for Li Mu to work for her was that she could afford to pay him satisfactory remuneration. An employee could do anything for her boss, but the premise was that she had to give him grass. A boss who let the horse run but didn't give the horse grass would not be able to recruit loyal employees. Leaving the palace, Li Mu passed by a jewelry store and bought a protective talisman that could be hung around his neck. He replaced the talisman to ward off evil spirits and put in the heaven-rank protective talisman that the Empress had just given him. Back home, Li Mu gave the protective talisman to Xiao Bai and said, "Wear this. Don't take it off at any time." Xiao Bai obediently tied the red thread around her neck and then stuffed the protective talisman into her chest. Li Mu's throat moved and he looked away without leaving a trace. He said, "Okay, go and cultivate." People were used to describing women who were fatally charming to men as fox spirits. There was a reason for this. The 17-year-old Xiao Bai was already so charming. In a few years she would be so charming that all men would fall head over heels for her. Li Mu had never seen other fox spirits, but he was sure that not every fox could be as beautiful as this after transforming into a human form. After recovering from Xiao Bai's charm, Li Mu began to think about the academy. He had only taken a small step forward and it was far from victory. Every academy in Luoyang had more than 100 years of history. A few tainted students could not shake their foundation. If he wanted to change the academy's control of the imperial court, he had to find a good reason for the Empress. Baichuan Academy. In response to the recent crisis of the academy's trust, Vice Principal Chen gathered all the instructors of the academy and warned them seriously, "Restrain your students. If there is nothing important, do not leave the academy. If any of them commit crimes and tarnish the academy's reputation, no matter how big or small, they will all be expelled from the academy." All the instructors nodded and said yes. This crisis of the academy's reputation was the first since its establishment. If they were not careful, they would destroy the academy's century-old reputation. One of the instructors said, "Today in the imperial court, the officials from Clear Sky Academy and Myriad Scroll Academy slandered our Baichuan Academy. We cannot give them another chance." Another instructor snorted coldly. "What qualifications do they have to slander us? Apart from White Deer Academy, the students of Green Cloud Academy and Myriad Scroll Academy aren't any better than us. In my opinion, we should expose the dirty deeds of their academies and let everyone see." "Stupid." Vice Principal Chen glanced at him and said, "Can't you see that this is Her Majesty's intention? She has long been dissatisfied with the officials from the Great Zhou leaving the academy. If we drag Clear Sky Academy and Myriad Scroll Academy down, won't it give Her Majesty a good reason?" The other instructors heard this and came to a realization. The four academies had always been on the same side when it came to selecting officials for the imperial court. If the four academies were the first to have internal strife, then the one who would be the happiest would be the Empress, who had long wanted to deal with the academy. No matter if it was Baichuan Academy, Clear Sky Academy or Myriad Scroll Academy, the Empress wanted to see any of them fall. What she wanted to see more was the four academies killing each other. Fortunately, Vice Principal Chen reminded them. Otherwise they wouldn't have thought of this. "I didn't expect a woman like Her Majesty to be so scheming. She wants to sit by and watch the academies fight amongst themselves. Her intentions are sinister. We can't let her succeed." Vice Principal Chen let out a long sigh and said, "The academies have existed for so long, and there are indeed many problems that have arisen internally. This wasn't the academy's intention. The academies can slowly correct these problems, but if Her Majesty takes the opportunity to interfere and change the structure of the imperial court, I'm afraid that in a few decades, the four academies will only exist in name." One of the instructors said worriedly, "Clear Sky Academy and Myriad Scroll Academy aren't much better than Baichuan Academy. It's very easy for them to find out about the dirty deeds their students have done. I'm afraid that even if we don't do anything, someone else will." As soon as he finished speaking, the old man guarding the entrance of Baichuan Academy hurriedly ran in and said, "Principal, bad news. Li Mu is here again." Li Mu asked Wang Wu and the others to set up a table in a shady corner at the entrance of Baichuan Academy. There was a brush and ink placed on the table. He moved a chair over and sat down behind the desk with a grand air of grandeur. Several instructors walked out of Baichuan Academy. The leader angrily scolded, "What are you doing here again?" Li Mu turned around and put his arm on the chair. He said, "In order to clean up the unhealthy practices in Luoyang and return the people a clear sky, the Luoyang government has started a street activity. From today onwards, if the people want to report a case, they don't have to go to the government office. They just have to do it here." The instructor said, "If you want to do it somewhere else. This is the academy, not the Luoyang government's place." The academy didn't stop the Luoyang government from handling cases, but he put it at the entrance of the academy. Those who didn't know would think that the academy was bullying the people and he was here to support them. Li Mu said, "This place is big and spacious. Besides, I'm not blocking your way. This is the academy's place, but it's also the land of the Great Zhou. This place has been temporarily expropriated by the Luoyang government." Under Li Mu's gaze, Wang Wu rolled the paper in his hand into a loudspeaker and shouted, "Those who come from the south and those who come from the north, come and take a look. Constable Li is handling a case here today. Everyone, if you have any grievances, please seek justice. If you have any grievances, please seek revenge." Chapter 254. The academy was not on the busiest main street of Luoyang. There were not many passers-by at the entrance. After Wang Wu shouted a few times, the passers-by began to gather here. Soon, even the people on the main street were attracted here. The entrance of Baichuan Academy was crowded with people. The people who came late stood outside the crowd and tiptoed to look inside. What's going on inside? What's going on? Why is there an extra table at the entrance of the academy? Why is Constable Li here? Is Constable Li here to cause trouble for the academy again? After the crowd asked around, they found out that Li Mu was not here to cause trouble for the academy. He was here to redress the grievances of the people and uphold justice. To the people of Luoyang, the government was full of mystery and fear. There was a saying among the people, "The entrance of the government office faces the south. Those who are in the right but have no money should not enter." The government office was never a place to uphold justice for the people. Many innocent people who entered the government office felt even more wronged. The procedure to report a case to the government office was cumbersome and there was a high chance that it would not end well. Over time, the people no longer trusted the government office. They would rather be wronged than report a case to the government office. However, Constable Li, who had upheld justice for the people many times, was sitting behind the table at the entrance of Baichuan Academy. The words "government office" and "report a case" seemed to have no distance with the people. All of this originated from the serious environment of the government office. It became a familiar scene for the people on the streets. More importantly, they trusted Li Mu. The people were afraid of the government officials. However, Constable Li patrolled the streets all day long. Most people had greeted and talked to him. Just seeing his face made them feel close to him. For a moment, the people who passed by complained about their grievances. Those who were innocent also stood aside to watch the show. A man bravely walked forward and said, "Constable Li, the shopkeeper of the butcher's shop in the west of the city, owes me 2 taels of silver. He refuses to admit it. Can the government office help me collect the debt?" Li Mu looked at Deputy Constable Sun and said, "Old Sun, go with him and have a look." Deputy Constable Sun was in the state of Jushen. It was more than enough for him to deal with this kind of civil dispute. Deputy Constable Sun saluted Li Mu and left with the man. The crowd stood at the side and watched for a while. They realized that Constable Li really wanted to uphold justice for the people of Luoyang. Those who had been wronged stopped watching and boldly walked forward. "Constable Li, my family's land has been invaded. Constable Li, my chickens were stolen yesterday. Constable Li, a student of Baichuan Academy once violated my daughter. The students of the Baichuan Academy are still in my wine shop, refusing to return the wine on credit." Li Mu asked Wang Wu and the others to deal with the case of land embezzlement and chicken theft. He said to the last 2 people, "Come, the 2 of you, tell me your grievances in detail." A middle-aged man said angrily, "This commoner's daughter was once made drunk by a student of the academy and cheated of her virginity. Now she can't even get married. She stays at home every day washing her face with tears." The owner of the wine shop said, "I can testify that the students of the 3 academies often mingle with women and go in and out of inns and restaurants." In a few days, Li Mu's table was moved from the entrance of the Baichuan Academy to the street in front of the Qingyun Academy. It was in the tea house opposite the Myriad Scroll Academy. Through the reports of the people and his investigation, Li Mu found that Wei Bin, Jiangzhe, and the others were definitely not special cases of the Baichuan Academy. These students relied on their status as students of the academy. Although they did not bully the people, they were passionate about seducing women. It had even become a trend. They would even compare themselves with each other. They would compare who had obtained the most chastity from women in a month, and who had slept with a strange woman the fastest. The winner could even gain some benefits from the loser. The academy was the cradle of cultivating officials for the imperial court. The status of the students of the academy naturally rose. The students of the academy were the future pillars of the imperial court. They should be elegant, knowledgeable, and have a bright future. Such men were the best choices for women. With their status as students of the academy, they could easily get to know all kinds of women. In the beginning, a man and a woman would just talk about romance and ideals. Soon they would talk about sex. Among them, some of the women were willing. They hoped to find a good son-in-law. When he entered the officialdom, they could become the wife of an official. From then on, they could live a life of luxury and live a carefree life. However, they did not know that the students of the academy just wanted to cheat their feelings and bodies. For this kind of scumbag men, they could only be condemned morally but could not be punished legally. Men and women were willing. If they wanted to blame someone, they could only blame those women for not seeing the true colors of the scumbag men. They had to bear the consequences of their own decisions. If the girls were unwilling, students like Wei Bin and Jiangzhe would resort to violence or force them to get drunk and knock them out to achieve their goals. This kind of thing was not new to the students of the academy. Not all women would have sex with them in a short period of time. Some impatient people would resort to raping or drugging women to take their bodies. After the matter was exposed, many victims and their families did not dare to offend the academy and could only swallow their anger. For example, shopkeeper Su did not succeed in reporting the students of the academy to the Ministry of Justice. Instead, they were threatened. Li Mu had now gained the trust of the people of the divine capital. In just 3 days, he had received dozens of reports of the students of the academy raping women. Considering that some of the women's families were afraid of the academy and did not dare to stand up, the number would only be higher. This involved not only the 100 Rivers Academy, but also the Azure Cloud Academy and the Myriad Scroll Academy. Only the White Deer Academy did not have such a case because of its closed management and strict requirements for its students. How was this an academy that nurtured talents for the imperial court? It was clearly a cradle for rapists. Even if the number of students was less than 1/10 of the total number of students in the academy and could not represent the entire academy, it was still shocking that 1 out of every 10 students had a record of raping women. It was hard to imagine if such a person became an official in the future, what would his governance be like? Li Mu also did not know how many such talents the 3 academies had sent to the imperial court over the years. No wonder there would be officials like the magistrate of Yang County. The 3 academies were so ridiculous. Perhaps there were more than 1 Yang County in the hundreds of counties in the Great Zhou dynasty, and more than 1 Yang County in the hundreds of counties. Crepe Myrtle Hall. The morning assembly had just begun when a figure stood out from the corner and bowed. "Your Majesty, I have a memorial." The Empress's voice came from behind the curtain. "What is it, Minister Li?" Li Mu asked Shangguan Li to hand over a memorial and said in a deep voice, "I recently found out that dozens of students from the 100 Rivers Academy, Azure Cloud Academy, and Myriad Scroll Academy have raped nearly 100 women in half a year. It is shocking. I don't know if the existence of these academies is to nurture talents for the imperial court or to nurture criminals for the Great Zhou." After a while, the Empress asked the young female official to hand over the memorial and said, "Everyone, please take a look." In the Ziwei Palace, Li Mu's memorial began to be read from the front to the back. All the officials who had read the memorial were silent. Behind the curtains, the Empress held a piece of paper that was sandwiched between the memorials. Her dignified voice was cold as it rang in the ears of the officials. "This is the pillar of the imperial court that the Academy mentioned, and this is the future official of the Great Zhou dynasty. I finally understand that the problem of the Great Zhou dynasty is not the demon race, nor the ghost region, but the Academy and the imperial court. The officials of the Great Zhou dynasty are all from the Academy. If the Academy is rotten, the Great Zhou dynasty will be rotten. If the Academy is rotten, the people of the 36 counties will no longer trust the imperial court." Chapter 255. Li Mu was trying his best to be the Empress's personal assistant. The Empress was alone and helpless in the court. Li Mu stood out and rebuked the officials for her. The Empress wanted to attack the academy. Li Mu set up the court at the entrance of the academy to collect evidence of the students' crimes. Even when he was writing memorials, he would meticulously prepare a speech for the Empress, unlike Gong Sunli, who stood outside the curtain like a robot and only knew how to pass on the Empress's words and shout, "Morning," and "Morning." It was a pity that there was no crooked tree behind the Ziwei Palace. Otherwise, these words would be more impactful. The Empress' dignified voice echoed in the palace. Every word she said was like a sword that stabbed into the hearts of the officials. Li Mu had said something similar. However, he was only a small constable and a small censor. He had no right to say such things. In the entire Great Zhou, only the Empress had the right to say such things. The continuation of the Great Zhou depended on the psyche power of the people of the 36 counties. This was a fact that everyone knew. The psyche power was not only a sign that the court had won the hearts of the people. The Emperor's qi in the ancestral temple was also condensed from the psyche power of the people of the Great Zhou. When the court lost the hearts of the people, internal and external troubles came in waves. This was the reason why the previous dynasty fell. Even the important officials of the old and new parties fell into deep thought. Whether the Shao or the Zhou family would take the throne of the Great Zhou was an irreconcilable conflict between them. However, neither the Shao nor the Zhou family was willing to take over a broken country. If the Great Zhou fell, what was the point of fighting over it? If the academy grew, it would not be good for the stability of the imperial power. Although they all wanted to borrow the power of the academy, they did not want the academy to suppress the imperial power. They did not want the Great Zhou to be destroyed by the academy. Before Li Mu revealed these things, they did not realize that there was such a serious problem in the academy. Today's morning court ended in an extremely quiet atmosphere. The Empress did not continue the reform of the official selection system. She only urged the Ministry of Justice, the Shindu Yamen, the Censorate, and the Supreme Court to seriously deal with the students who committed crimes in the 3 major academies. Everyone knew that this was just the calm before the storm. After the students of the academy were dealt with, it was the academy's turn. After the morning court session, Li Mu was about to leave the palace, but Mr. Mei stopped him and whispered, "His Majesty summons you." Li Mu followed Mr. Mei to a garden in the back palace. There were hundreds of flowers in the garden. Many of the flowers that were not in season were blooming at the same time. A figure stood in front of them. She was wearing an imperial robe and a crown. However, her back was facing Li Mu. Li Mu could not see her face. Li Mu could only see a back view, but this back view looked very familiar. Based on his experience in observing women, he could infer that Her Majesty the Empress should be quite beautiful just by looking at her back. Many thoughts flashed through his mind in an instant. Li Mu stood in the distance and bowed. "Your subject pays his respects to Your Majesty," the Empress said slowly, "No need for formalities." Her voice was very calm and soothing. Her tone alone could not guess her thoughts. She turned her back to Li Mu and seemed to be admiring the flowers. After a long time she spoke again. With her back to Li Mu she asked again, "I want to build another academy outside the 4 academies. What do you think?" Li Mu shook his head and said, "I don't think so." Gong Sunli frowned. Mr. Mei kept winking at Li Mu, but Li Mu pretended not to see it. He positioned himself as a counselor, not a lackey. If the Empress was criticized by the academy, he would stand up for her. If he thought what the Empress wanted to do was right, he would help her. However, if he did not agree with the Empress' idea, he would still raise it. The Empress was not angry. Her voice was still calm. "Tell me what you think." Li Mu said, "The 3 academies have developed to today's situation largely because the academies have monopolized the official positions in the imperial court. As long as the students of the academies can graduate from the academies, they can easily enter the imperial court. If the academies are not strictly managed, it is easy for them to breed arrogance and debauchery. Your Majesty, if you build another academy, it will be no different from the other academies." The Empress said, "In your opinion, how should the imperial court change this situation?" Li Mu said, "Open the imperial examination." The Empress paused and asked, "What is the imperial examination?" Li Mu explained, "The imperial court will no longer choose officials from the academies. Instead, they will choose officials through the examination. The examination must be fair, just, and open." Gong Sunli said, "The academy system was established by Emperor Wen. It has been more than 100 years. It is impossible for you to bypass the 4 academies." Not bypass but take back the power to choose officials from the imperial court. Li Mu shook his head and said, the existence of the academies is not completely a drawback. Although there has been a bad trend in the 3 academies over the years, there is no need to completely deny the academies. Most of the students of the academies are far better than ordinary people in terms of talent and virtue. The students of the academies can still participate in the imperial examination. They can also pass the examination more easily than those who are not from the academies. But through the selection of the imperial examination, the imperial court will no longer be completely decided by the academies. There will also be pressure among the students of the academies. The academies will be able to suppress the academies. Li Mu looked at the Empress's back and said, the imperial examination is very conducive to the gathering of the people's faith. After the imperial examination, the people at the bottom will also have the qualifications to enter the imperial court. It will be very good to curb the situation of the students of the 4 academies. The poor officials who are promoted through the imperial examination will definitely be grateful to the imperial court and your majesty. The benefits of the imperial examination were needless to say. It could completely change the current deadlock of the imperial court in the Great Zhou and inject new vitality into the imperial court. As long as people were scientifically selected and this method of becoming an official didn't become rigid, even if the Great Zhou was destroyed in the future, the imperial examination would continue to exist. The Empress was silent for a moment, then suddenly said, open your mouth. Li Mu was stunned for a moment, thinking that he had misheard. A white light shot from the Empress's body into Li Mu's mouth. Li Mu could faintly see that it was a pill. The pill melted in his mouth, turning into a thick spiritual energy that surged into his limbs and bones. Large beads of sweat rolled down Li Mu's forehead. This spiritual energy was too large and violent. It reminded him of the situation when he was possessed by the Sage of 1,000 Illusions. Just as Li Mu felt that he couldn't hold on any longer, a gentle energy suddenly surged into his body. The source of this energy was the Empress, whose back was facing him. This energy was very gentle, like a spring breeze. However, under this gentle energy, the violent spiritual energy began to calm down and slowly flowed into Li Mu's dantian. Li Mu felt that the spiritual energy in his dantian was constantly rising, finally reaching a peak. At a certain moment, Li Mu suddenly felt that something in his body had broken. He tried to use the wholeness character of the 9 words mantra and found that this Tao technique, which he couldn't use before, no longer had any hindrances. This meant that he had stepped into the realm of supernatural powers. The middle realm that he had yearned for even in his dreams, had been easily attained. At this moment, Li Mu deeply felt that his initial decision to follow the Empress was indeed correct. She could give him whatever he wanted. Suppressing his joy, Li Mu bowed and said, thank you, your majesty. The Empress said lightly, you are my man. The stronger you are, the more you can do for me. Li Mu finally had the opportunity to see the Empress face to face and ask her questions about cultivation. He looked up at the back of the Empress and asked, your majesty, I encountered an inner demon during my cultivation. That inner demon occasionally appeared in my dreams, and it always took the form of a strange woman. Your majesty's cultivation is very profound. I would like to ask your majesty, what should I do to defeat the inner demon? Mr. May's face changed. He lowered his head to hide his expression. The Empress said, the inner demon is born in your heart. Only you can defeat it. No one else can help you. He didn't expect that even a master of the upper 3 realms couldn't do anything about his inner demon. Li Mu sighed and said, I understand. The Empress said slowly, I will carefully consider the matter of the imperial examination. You can go back first. Li Mu bowed and said, I will take my leave. Li Mu finally had the opportunity to be so close to the Empress, but he still couldn't see her face. This made him feel a little regretful. But this regret was quickly washed away by the joy of leveling up. Li Mu happily returned to the yamen and saw Wang Wu and the others gathered together. Their heads were facing in and their butts were facing out. He didn't know what they were doing sneakily. Li Mu coughed. They immediately stood up straight and said, Boss? Li Mu looked at them and asked, what are you looking at? Wang Wu put one hand behind his back and said, nothing. Li Mu stretched out his hand and said, give it to me. Wang Wu sighed and put a booklet in Li Mu's hand. Li Mu looked at the booklet in his hand and saw the words, 100 Beauties of Shendu, written on it. Li Mu put the booklet in his sleeve and went back to his room. He looked at it with interest and said, you're not allowed to look at these things when you're in the yamen. I'll confiscate it. He originally thought that it was a restricted booklet, but after opening it he found that the women in it were all wearing clothes. He flipped to the front page and read the introduction of the booklet. He learned that it was an atlas of Shindu drawn by an artist in Shindu. It included more than 100 beautiful women in Shindu. Li Mu casually flipped through a few pages and a face that made him yearn for day and night came into view. It was a young girl. She was only 16 or 17 years old. Her face was 80 to 90% similar to Lu Hanyan. At the bottom left of the portrait there was a note. Lu Hanyan, musician of Miaoying Street. Her zither skills were the best in Shindu. Clearly, this was her when she was a young girl. This painting was at least 5 or 6 years ago. Li Mu had never seen her at this time. Li Mu stared at the portrait of her when she was a young girl for a long time. The yearning in his heart deepened. He was about to close the booklet when he accidentally glanced at the portrait of a woman on the next page. Seeing the woman's face, Li Mu's body shook. This woman was exactly the same as the woman he often dreamed of. Chapter 256. Li Mu looked at the woman in the album carefully and confirmed that she looked very similar to his inner demon. Although the woman in the painting was younger, there was no doubt that this was a portrait of her from a few years ago, just like Lu Hanyan's portrait. Li Mu thought that his inner demon was a figment of his imagination. He didn't expect to find the original in reality. He looked at the bottom left corner of the portrait and found the woman's information. There were 2 lines of words at the bottom left corner of the portrait. Zhou Yi, eldest daughter of Minister Zhou Jing, now the crown princess. She has an extraordinary appearance and outstanding cultivation talent. It is said that the crown prince doesn't like her. She has been married for 2 years and is still a virgin. Li Mu stood there in a daze, his mind blank. This was the first time he heard the name Zhou Yi. But wasn't the daughter of Minister Zhou Jing the former crown princess, the current empress? This album looked quite old. It was at least 5 years ago. At that time the empress was still the crown princess, and the artist didn't have to be so secretive. But even 5 years ago this kind of thing should be discussed in private in a small circle. It couldn't be brought out in public. Of course this wasn't important to Li Mu. The important thing was, how could his inner demon be Her Majesty the Empress? This couldn't be a coincidence. There was no such coincidence in the world. He had never seen the Empress's true face. How could he imagine her in his dream? The only possibility was that the woman in his dream wasn't some inner demon. She was the Empress herself. With her level 7 cultivation she could easily use the dream transference technique to invade Li Mu's dream. But why did she invade Li Mu's dream? Why did she ravage him in his dream? Li Mu thought about it carefully and soon remembered that every time the Empress appeared in his dreams and brutally ravaged him, it was when he was gossiping about the Empress. For example, whether she was still a virgin, whether she didn't get along with the former crown prince. He was so gossipy during the day, and he would be beaten up in his dream at night. No wonder Mr. May's expression was so strange when he saw the image of the woman in his dream. No wonder when the Empress summoned him, her back was facing him. When he saw the picture album, all the mysteries in Li Mu's heart were solved. It's fake. It was all fake. Her Majesty the Empress being magnanimous and magnanimous was all a lie. On the surface she didn't seem to care about anything, but in fact she had already thought about how to take revenge tonight. What made Li Mu even more unimaginable was how she knew that he was gossiping about her. Although transcending realm powerhouses possessed remarkable abilities, they didn't have clairvoyant eyes and ears. They didn't have the ability to know everything under the heavens without leaving their homes. No matter what, the mystery that had troubled him for many days was finally solved. At this moment, Li Mu didn't know whether to be happy or worried. He did not give birth to an inner demon. This was naturally a joyous matter, but the truth was even more terrifying than the birth of an inner demon. Li Mu closed the album. After calming himself down, he carefully analyzed the situation. If the Empress really wanted to blame him, she could casually find a reason to make Li Mu suffer. However, she only beat him up in his dream. In reality, she doted on Li Mu in every possible way. She gave him magic weapons, spiritual jades, tributes, and even personally helped Li Mu break through the realm. This showed that she didn't intend to pursue the matter. This made Li Mu comfort himself, but at the same time he felt that it was difficult to adapt. The Empress gave him the feeling that she was powerful and majestic. What she showed in front of the ministers and Li Mu was indeed such an image. No one knew that the Empress had another face that would reveal itself at night. At this time Wang Wu slipped in from outside and said, "Boss, I know I was wrong. I won't be lazy in the future. Can you return that book to me? It took me a lot of effort to find it. Li Mu glanced at him and asked, "What book?" Wang Wu looked at the album on the table. He knew that although it was close at hand, it no longer belonged to him. He shook his head and said sadly, "It's nothing. I'm going down." After taking 2 steps, he turned back and reminded him again, "Boss, you can read this book by yourself. Don't spread it out. This thing was banned back then and now it contains disrespectful content. You can't let anyone know about it." The great disrespect was naturally referring to the portrait of the empress. Now she was no longer the daughter of the Zhou family, nor was she the crown princess. According to the law, she should be beheaded for privately drawing a portrait of the emperor. Perhaps the person who drew this portrait would never have imagined that the crown princess would become the future empress. Otherwise he would not dare to gossip about her in the book. Zhou Yi, the name sounds good. After becoming the empress, no one dared to mention her original name. Although Li Mu was determined to be the empress's bodyguard, this was the first time he heard her name. Li Mu did not dare to look at the empress again. He looked at the portrait and thought about Lu Hanyan for a while. Then he put away the album and sat cross-legged on the bed. Now, with the help of the empress, he had successfully advanced to the Abhijna level and stepped into the middle 3 realms of cultivation. The middle 3 realms were a watershed for cultivators. Cultivators in the immortal realm could only use some small spells that borrowed wind and fog. Once they stepped into the Abhijna level, they could come into contact with the truly mysterious world of cultivation. Walking on water and sitting on fire, entering the water to control the wind, swallowing knives and spitting flames, moving in the opposite direction, gathering beasts and regulating birds, and using great strength to restrict. After stepping into the Abhijna level, the number of Abhijna spells a cultivator could use would greatly increase, and they would all have a certain amount of power. This was the origin of the 4th realm of Taoism. At the 5th realm, creation, the number of Abhijna spells one could use would increase, and their power would also be stronger. They could use the 5 elements escape technique, immobilization and so on. Abhijna spells at this stage already had the power of creation. And at Dongxian they could carry mountains and restrict rivers, move scenery and take the moon, pinch fingers to calculate, see the secrets of the heavens and predict the future. As for the upper 3 realms, they were even stronger. Li Mu did not think too much about this. His strength was forcefully raised by the empress. If he did not stabilize it quickly, there would be a risk of it falling. Although the taste of being forcefully raised was painful, if the empress could give him this from time to time, the creation was just around the corner. Late at night, Xiao Bai beside him had already fallen asleep. Li Mu was still stabilizing his breathing. Suddenly, a wave of sleepiness hit him. In front of Li Mu's eyes, the woman in his dreams appeared again. After seeing the portrait of the empress, Li Mu naturally no longer thought that this was his inner demon. The dream marriage technique of a transcendent powerhouse could easily invade other people's dreams and weave them wantonly. This technique could also trap a person's consciousness in a dream, forever unable to wake up. Li Mu forced himself to calm down. He could not show the slightest difference. The empress met him with the dream entry technique because she did not want Li Mu to recognize her identity. Once her identity was exposed, she would fly into a rage out of humiliation. He did not know what she would do. Li Mu chanted the clear heart technique, calmly greeted her and said, "We meet again." The woman glanced at him and said lightly, "You don't seem to want to see me." Li Mu quickly explained, No, in the days when you did not appear, I was thinking about you every day." "Thinking about me?" The woman looked at Li Mu and asked, "What about me?" Li Mu did not continue this topic and said, "I think you are very similar to someone." The woman asked, "Who?" Li Mu said, "Her Majesty the Empress." Deep in the woman's eyes, a trace of panic flashed for the first time. But her expression was still calm. She asked, "How so?" "I can't say. Just feel so," Li Mu said and then shook his head. He murmured, "No, you and Her Majesty only look alike from the back. Your personality is completely different. You only know how to play with whips. You are vengeful and stingy. Her Majesty is broad-minded and considerate to her subjects. Not only did she give me spiritual jades, but she also helped me improve my cultivation." The woman glanced at Li Mu and said, "She is so good to you because she wants to use you." Li Mu's face darkened. The Bai sword appeared in his hand. He pointed at her and said, "Her Majesty is the person I admire the most. I will not allow you to disrespect her. You dare to criticize Her Majesty. I cannot tolerate this. Show me your weapon." Chapter 257. Even though Li Mu was always on the edge of danger, he still managed to get through the night safely. This was all thanks to his superb acting skills that he had trained. Li Mu didn't know why the Empress always appeared in his dreams, but no matter what, he would just praise her. No matter how narrow-minded the Empress was, she wouldn't be jealous of herself. He finally understood that trouble came from careless talk. No wonder Mr. May kept reminding him to be respectful to the Empress. It seemed that she already knew everything back then. Thinking about how she acted when she saw his inner demon, it wasn't that strange anymore. Recalling the past with the woman in his dreams, Li Mu was almost certain that the Empress wouldn't do anything to him. And he didn't have to worry about being disturbed by his inner demon. He could finally relax. Li Mu had been in the Luoyang for more than 2 months and had experienced a lot. He missed Lu Hanyan and Wanwan very much. He planned to go back to the northern region after the matters at the academy were settled. He left with the White Demon King without saying goodbye. He wondered how Suhi was doing at the Bay of Clearwater. When he arrived at the Luoyang government, he happened to see Wang Wu putting a young man who looked like a student in jail. The Empress ordered all the government offices in the Luoyang government to investigate the cases involving the students of the 3 academies. Other than the Luoyang government, the Ministry of Justice, the Supreme Court, and the Censorate also started to investigate these cases. The people of the Luoyang government who were wronged could go to these government offices themselves. Since the Empress had given the order, no government office dared to bend the law. If they were found out, the entire government office would be implicated. In the eyes of the people, the Luoyang government was fairer than any other government office in the Luoyang government. Some of the people who didn't dare to go public with their grievances gradually started to go to the Luoyang government. Zhang Chun finished dealing with the case and sighed, "What's wrong with the students nowadays? When we were studying at the academy, the teachers were very strict with us. Those who didn't behave well would be kicked out of the academy. It's only been 20 years and the academy has become a place to hide evil." Emperor Wen had a good intention in establishing the academy. Since the establishment of the academy, it had been held in high esteem by the people for more than 100 years. Although officials from different academies had formed cliques 100 years ago, where there were people, there would be disputes. Even without the 4 academies, it was inevitable for officials to form cliques in any era. At that time, the quality of the academy students was much higher than now. The atmosphere in the academy had changed and worsened since the time of the former emperor. More than 100 years ago, when Emperor Wen was on the throne, he contributed decades of peace to the Great Zhou. The subsequent emperors were not as wise as Emperor Wen, but they were able to enjoy the fruits of Emperor Wen's rule. As long as they followed the rules and were a ruler that protected what was achieved, they would be meritorious. However, during the reign of the previous emperor, in order to prove that he was different from the previous emperors, the previous emperor implemented many government decrees. For example, the establishment of the silver law of guilt substitution and the continuous increase of privileges for the Shao royal family. All of these caused many unstable factors to appear in the Great Zhou court. Within the imperial court, officials represented different interest groups. There were constant disputes between parties and many people died because of this. Outside the imperial court, the 36 counties were not stable either. The demon path was causing trouble everywhere. The demon nation and the ghost realm were also eyeing the borders covetously. The situation did not improve even when the empress succeeded the throne. The chaos in the divine capital led to chaos in the academy. No one knew when this unhealthy trend started in the 3 academies. The students who were supposed to be the pillars of the imperial court had become the scourge of the divine capital. Zhang Chun said regretfully, "Emperor Wen once said that the students of the academy should read the books of the sages and learn supernatural powers. They should save the world and the people and serve the country. Now, they have forgotten the original purpose of Emperor Wen's establishment of the academy. They have forgotten why they study, 100 Rivers Academy." Vice President Chen saw another student being taken away by the yamen and asked, "How many is this?" An instructor shook his head and said, "The 16th. It is said that the Divine Capital Yamen, Ministry of Justice, Censorate, and Supreme Court have taken away more than 20 students from the Myriad Scrolls Academy, and more than 10 from the Qingyun Academy." Another instructor sighed and said, "We didn't know about this. It's good that these students have left the academy, lest they do something worse in the future and tarnish the academy's reputation." Vice President Chen said, "It's not about the academy's reputation anymore. According to the officials at the West Desk of the Secretariat, His Majesty has decided to change the selection system of the Great Zhou Court and start the imperial examination." An instructor asked in confusion, What's the imperial examination? Vice President Chen said, His Majesty wants to select different subjects. From now on, all the officials of the imperial court will not be selected from the academy. If one wants to enter the imperial court as an official, he must pass the imperial court selection. Even the students of the academy are no exception. The reason why the academy was called the academy was because the officials of the Great Zhou dynasty all came from the academy. For more than 100 years, they had provided the academy with an endless stream of vitality and vitality. If this vitality and vitality were to be cut off, the academy would not be far from extinction. If Emperor Wen was the beginning of the academy's era, then the Empress was the end of the academy's era. At this moment, a powerful aura suddenly rose from the academy. An old man with a head full of white hair appeared in the crowd. He glanced at the crowd and snorted coldly. I've only been in seclusion for half a year, and the academy is already in such a mess because of you. Elder Huang has come out of seclusion. Welcome, Elder Huang. When the crowd saw the old man, they all bowed. In the academy, other than the president who was in seclusion all year round, Elder Huang had the highest status. They were both vice presidents, but even Vice President Chen had to greet him as a junior. Not only was Elder Huang's cultivation high, but he had also been in Dongxian for decades. He had taught countless important officials and made great contributions to the Great Zhou. He was the soul of the Baichuan Academy. The white-haired old man snorted coldly and said, The imperial court can punish the mistakes of the academy's students. The academy can also correct the evil practices of the academy. She's just using this as a pretext to make a fuss. She wants to monopolize the power and cultivate her trusted subordinates. She wants to firmly control the imperial court in her hands. The four great academies will not tolerate such a thing. During the morning court, Li Mu was surprised to find a chair in front of the officials. A white-haired old man was sitting on the chair. Those who could sit in the crepe myrtle hall were naturally not ordinary people. He learned from the discussions of the officials that this old man seemed to be a vice president of the Baichuan Academy. He was very senior and had been given the right to sit in the imperial court when the previous emperor was still on the throne. Because of those scandals, the people from the academy had not appeared in the morning court several times. Today was the first time they had appeared. The old man sat there with a straight face. Even the atmosphere in the imperial court was much more solemn. Today's morning court was mainly about the imperial court holding the imperial examination and selecting talents to replace the previous situation where the academy monopolized the imperial court. This method was undoubtedly completely abolishing the old system. When the empress proposed it, it did not arouse any discussion among the officials. Only a few officials from the censorate responded. Because for most of the people standing in the imperial court, this was contrary to their interests. The officials in the imperial court were said to be from the academy, but in the final analysis, the students of the academy were the children of the Great Zhou's powerful families. They sent their children to the academy, and after a few years they could enter the imperial court as officials. This way, the status and power of their families would be passed down from generation to generation. Once the imperial court did not directly select officials from the academy, they would lose this privilege. In the past, they only had to compete with other powerful families. If the imperial court did not limit the selection of officials by birth, they would have to compete with all the talents in the 36 counties of the Great Zhou for a limited number of official positions. In this way, unless their families could continuously produce outstanding talents, the decline of their families was a foregone conclusion. No one was willing to accept this reality. Every time the empress was isolated by the officials, Li Mu knew that it was time for him to stand up. He had already offended all the factions in the imperial court, and did not mind offending them again. He stood up and said, I believe that the talents of the Great Zhou are not limited to the four academies. The imperial examination will allow the imperial court to discover more talents from the common people, break the academy's monopoly on officials, and curb the academy's unhealthy practices. Who are you? How dare you talk nonsense about the academy? Before Li Mu could finish speaking, he heard a reprimanding voice. He raised his head and saw that the white-haired old man sitting on the chair at the front of the great hall stood up. Li Mu said calmly, The reason why dozens of students from the three academies were imprisoned and beheaded in the past few days is obvious to all the lords in the hall. I'm just telling the truth. There's no need to talk nonsense. The old man did not mention this matter. He looked at Li Mu, took a step forward and said sternly, The four academies have been established for 100 years. How many talents have been sent to the imperial court? How many contributions have they made to the stability of the Great Zhou? You want to deny the achievements of the academies, deceive His Majesty, bring chaos to the imperial court, and destroy the 100 years of foundation of the Great Zhou because of a mistake made by a student of the academies. What are your intentions? As he took a step forward, the aura of the white-haired old man suddenly spread out. This aura did not originate from his Dongxin realm, but from the telekinesis on his body. An endless stream of telekinesis was emitted from his body. It even activated the power of the heavens and the earth and pressed down on Li Mu. Under the impact of this aura, Li Mu took several steps back. He only managed to stop himself when he crushed a green brick under his feet. An abnormal flush appeared on his face. In the Great Hall, many people smiled. The officials of the Ministry of Personnel, especially the Assistant Minister of Personnel, were incomparably delighted. They looked at Li Mu with eyes full of schadenfreude. How dare you? Behind the curtain, an incomparably powerful aura suddenly exploded. Chapter 258. When the Empress was angry, her cultivation of the seventh realm was fully revealed. Even the creation realm cultivators in the Crepe Myrtle Hall felt as if a mountain was pressing down on them, making it difficult for them to breathe. Only the few people standing at the front of the group of officials could face this pressure without changing their expressions. The white-haired old man's clothes fluttered without wind, but his expression was calm. He said, "I have dedicated my life to the academy and will not allow anyone to slander the Holy Land in my heart. I lost control of my emotions for a moment, please forgive me, Your Majesty." Facing the highest authority in the Great Zhou, a seventh realm transcendent existence, he was neither servile nor overbearing. This was because he was the Vice Dean of the 100 Rivers Academy and was at the peak of the sixth realm. He was only one step away from transcendence. As long as he took that step, the 100 Rivers Academy would have a second dean. In the face of the Empress' anger, he still looked calmly at Li Mu and asked, "For more than 100 years, the 100 Rivers Academy, Qingyun Academy, and Myriad Scroll Academy have cultivated countless officials for the imperial court. The scholars of the White Deer Academy guarded the borders and shed their blood on the battlefield. The contributions of the 4 academies to the Great Zhou are immeasurable. Today you want to overturn the foundations of the academies. Speak, what are your intentions?" In the 6 ministries and 9 temples, countless officials looked at Li Mu with a mocking gaze. The 4 academies had stood tall for 100 years. How could a nameless junior like him topple them? He thought that he could do whatever he wanted in the divine capital because of the Empress' favor. However, not everyone in the divine capital feared the Empress. Elder Huang had students all over the world. In the Crepe Myrtle Hall, countless officials of the 4th realm and above had received his teachings. He had dedicated his life to the academy. For decades, the people of the divine capital respected and trusted him. The willpower gathered in him could even communicate with the heavens and earth, allowing him to take half a step into transcendence. In the entire Great Zhou, he was the existence most likely to reach transcendence. Cultivators of the upper realm were not bound by the secular world. Once he took that step, he could transcend the world and be on the same level as the Empress. Li Mu wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and looked up at the white-haired old man. He said calmly, "You're asking me what my intentions are?" At this moment he was not afraid in the face of Dongxuan's cultivators. Because he had Her Majesty the Empress behind him. As long as he had a clear conscience, and a clear conscience, he had no need to fear anyone. Who would dare to criticize heaven and earth? Everyone suddenly looked at Li Mu. The incident in Yang County was still frightening when they thought about it. At that time, the county magistrate of Yang County was muddle-headed and tyrannical. He bullied the people and treated human life like grass. Li Mu pointed to the sky and scolded heaven and earth. Heaven and earth were influenced by him and created a peerless evil spirit. Zhou Chu's death was not long ago. Zhou Chu did evil in Shindu. Li Mu scolded heaven again. Heaven sent down divine punishment and smashed Zhou Chu into ashes in front of the people of Shindu. This established a heart for heaven and earth. You did it? Evil laws and tyrannical laws, torturing thousands of people. I establish a life for the people. After Li Mu entered Shindu within a month, he forced the imperial court to change the silver penalty law. He was praised by countless people in Shindu. Then he asked for justice for the people. He did not hesitate to offend the officials and even the academy. This established a life for the people. You did it? P.S. The original meaning of establishing a life for the people was to choose the right direction for the people's destiny and establish the meaning of life. Here it is understood as requesting a life. Inheriting the lost knowledge of the previous saints. Emperor Wu and Emperor Wen built a foundation for the Great Zhou for hundreds of years. The way they ruled the Great Zhou was not learned by the later emperors of Great Zhou. He said that he wanted to inherit the will of the two saints and let the Great Zhou regain its glory. Establishing peace for the world, establishing a peaceful foundation for the Great Zhou for the world. At this moment, who would dare to say such bold words? These 4 shocking words shocked everyone in the hall. They even ignored the increasingly strong fluctuations of the power of heaven and earth in the hall. The white-haired old man looked at Li Mu. In addition to shock, there was also a strong sense of envy in his eyes. This was not an ordinary fluctuation of the power of heaven and earth. In it, there was the aura of Taoist techniques. If he was the one who triggered the fluctuation of the power of heaven and earth, he would be able to step into transcendence in this hall today. At this moment, Li Mu suddenly turned his head and looked at the old man. He said sternly, Emperor Wen established the academy to cultivate talents for the Great Zhou, not to cultivate sinners. The shortcomings of the academy are obvious to all. You used the power of the academy to act presumptuously in the Golden Hall and offended His Majesty. How can this world tolerate you? As soon as he finished speaking, he took a big step forward. The chaotic power of heaven and earth in the hall suddenly became extremely orderly and oppressed the white-haired old man. He was giving him a taste of his own medicine. The old man's expression changed drastically. The next moment, a withered hand appeared in front of him. Li Mu's gaze met a pair of blood-red eyes. The white-haired old man's hand reached out to Li Mu's neck, but it stopped in mid-air. And in front of Li Mu there was a figure. A woman wearing an imperial robe and an imperial crown stood in front of Li Mu and raised her hand. The white-haired old man's body froze in mid-air. The aura in his body began to fall rapidly from the early Dongshen stage. Creation, remarkable power, spirit concentration, soul refinement. After a moment, there were no more magic power fluctuations in his body. The Empress raised her head and said majestically, "The Golden Hall injured my beloved minister and turned into a demon. Seeing that you have done well in the past, I will only cripple your cultivation and spare your life." Even heaven and earth were moved by such a person. With his cultivation crippled, Vice School Head Huang was overwhelmed by rage and fainted. The Empress slowly walked to the top and said, "Send Vice Headmaster Huang back to the academy." 2 guards walked in from outside and silently carried Vice Principal Huang out. The officials were all silent. Even the officials from the 100 Rivers Academy and Vice Principal Huang's former students all maintained their silence. Vice Principal Huang used righteousness to oppress Li Mu, but Li Mu used righteousness to suppress her. His righteousness was the righteousness of the academy. Li Mu's righteousness was the righteousness of heaven and earth. The righteousness of the academy was not worth mentioning in front of the righteousness of heaven and earth. The Empress looked down at the officials and said, "As for the imperial examination, the Central Secretary and the West Platform are to draft the rules within a month. After that, the Imperial Court will follow the imperial examination system in selecting officials. Does anyone have any objections?" The officials continued to be silent. No one spoke. At this point, who could have any objections? Who dared to have any objections? In the past, the academy had the righteousness. In the past 100 years, they had sent countless talents to the academy. Even Her Majesty could not be stubborn. But now, Li Mu's righteousness had overwhelmed the righteousness of the academy. Vice Principal Huang had been possessed by the devil in the Golden Hall and her cultivation had been destroyed. The righteousness of the academy had been seized by the Empress. As her subjects, they could not resist the Empress. Now that they could not even reason with her, what else could they say? The Central Secretary was silent for a moment. Then he stood up and bowed, saying, "Yes, Your Majesty." The Empress glanced at the officials and said majestically, "Dismissed." The Empress left from the back of the palace. After the officials bowed, they began to leave the Ziwei Palace in an orderly manner. Their eyes lingered on Li Mu for a long time. Their eyes were very complicated. All along, in the eyes of the officials in the imperial court, he was a disruptor and a destroyer of the established rules of the imperial court. Except for Her Majesty, he was disliked by everyone. He was an alien in the eyes of the officials. Until today, some people realized that Li Mu was not breaking the rules. He was re-establishing the rules. Perhaps in his eyes they were the aliens. There was no doubt that the structure of the imperial court would be changed after today. If His Majesty had Li Mu, he would have righteousness. If Li Mu had His Majesty, he would have a backer. Her Majesty had dignity and force. Li Mu convinced people with reason. But his reason was not reason but the law of the heavens. After the officials left, Li Mu was still standing in the palace and did not leave. He took a step forward, but his body swayed and he almost fell. His face turned pale in an instant. The white-haired old man's cultivation was at the peak of Dongxian. He was half a step away from transcendence. Li Mu had just entered the realm of divine power. He was almost 3 realms away from him. 1% of his power was not something Li Mu could withstand. The armor on his body could withstand the attacks of the cultivators of Dongxian. If not for the armor, he would have been seriously injured under the pressure of Li Mu's aura. The realm that had just risen would have fallen again. The white-haired old man's move was so vicious. Therefore, when he saw that the Empress had destroyed his cultivation, Li Mu did not have the slightest sympathy. Instead, he was somewhat gratified. It was not in vain that he had done so much for the Empress. There were still some healing pills in the ring. Li Mu was about to take out one when he suddenly heard a familiar voice. "Open your mouth." Li Mu subconsciously opened his mouth. A white light shot into his mouth. A pill melted in his mouth. The pure medicinal power dissolved in an instant and quickly healed his injuries. Soon, Li Mu's injuries were all healed. He felt that his body had returned to its peak state. Li Mu cupped his hands and bowed to the figure in the palace. "Thank you, Your Majesty." The Empress stood in front of him and asked, "Why don't you raise your head?" Li Mu lowered his head and said, "I dare not face you directly. A dream was just a dream." Li Mu wasn't ready to face the Empress in real life. "Dare not?" The Empress snorted. "You criticize me behind my back every day. Is there anything you dare not do?" Li Mu sighed. She said this to make everything clear. Even if Li Mu wanted to escape, it was impossible. He raised his head and looked at the familiar face in front of him. "I am guilty. I should not have criticized Your Majesty behind your back," the Empress asked. "When did you know that it was me?" Li Mu said honestly, "A few days ago I saw a portrait of Your Majesty when you were young." After saying this, he realized that something was wrong. He immediately said, "Your Majesty is still young. What I mean is, I accidentally saw a portrait of Your Majesty a few years ago." The Empress asked, "So the loyalty you expressed to me in the dream was also fake?" Li Mu cupped his hands and said, "The dream was fake but the words were true. Heaven and earth can bear witness to my feelings for Your Majesty." The Empress glanced at him and said, "I can let bygones be bygones. If you dare criticize me again in the future, I will not let you off easily." She had already looked into it. Thinking of the whip in the dream, Li Mu sighed inwardly. "I will remember. If there is nothing else, Your Majesty, I will take my leave." The Empress thought for a moment and said, "Have lunch before you leave." Li Mu enjoyed his lunch quietly in the palace. Outside the palace, huge waves were surging. The vice president of the 100 Rivers Academy, Elder Huang, who was at the peak of the 6th realm, was possessed by a demon in the Golden Palace. After the court session, the news of his cultivation being abolished by the Empress quickly swept through the divine capital. Elder Huang was respected in the academy. He had trained countless officials for the Great Zhou. He had a high reputation among the people. Even if the reputation of the 100 Rivers Academy was damaged, it did not affect his position in the hearts of the people. Apart from being the vice president of the 100 Rivers Academy, he was also a powerhouse who was one step away from transcendence. What happened to make him possess a demon in the Golden Palace and have his cultivation abolished by the Empress? What happened in the court session was interpreted by countless people from the mansions of the officials. In the past few decades, the atmosphere of the academy had been corrupted. It had even become a place of corruption. Li Mu agreed with the Empress to open the imperial examinations and appoint officials from all over the world. However, he was suppressed by Elder Huang. Breaking the academy's monopoly on the officials was beneficial to changing the atmosphere of the academy. It also gave other talents in the 36 counties a chance to stand out. This move was beneficial to the people. It placed the people, the nobles, and the aristocratic families in the divine capital on the same level. From then on, even the common people would have the opportunity to enter the court and become an official. However, this move obviously violated the academy's interests. Even the respected elder Huang did not hesitate to attack Li Mu in front of the empress and the officials for the sake of the academy's interests. However, he did not expect that Li Mu's enthusiasm would even move the heavens. Establishing a heart for heaven and earth, establishing life for the people, inheriting the lost knowledge of the past saints, and establishing peace for all ages. When Li Mu said these 4 sentences in the Great Hall, they shocked countless people. The academy's nurture talents for the court was pale and powerless compared to these 4 sentences. Those who could say these 4 sentences and put them into practice personally were worthy of being praised by all ages. If there are no powerhouses in the upper 3 realms to stop him, a cultivator from Dongxin who has turned into a demon can slaughter a city and destroy a country. One of the instructors sighed and said, His Majesty has already decreed that from now on, the imperial court has to select officials through the imperial examination. What should the academy do? Haha, the imperial court selects the best. If the students from the academy are not as good as others, it means that they are not talented enough. Even if they lose, there is nothing to complain about. A burst of laughter sounded in everyone's ears. A thin middle-aged man walked in from outside. Ding. When they saw the middle-aged man, everyone bowed. Even Vice Principal Chen bowed slightly to him. Then he looked at the white-haired old man lying on the bed and said, Principal Elder Huang, the middle-aged man said, I know all about it. He waved his sleeve and a white light enveloped the white-haired old man's body. The old man frowned, but he still did not open his eyes. The middle-aged man shook his head and sighed, saying, He doesn't want to wake up again. Vice President Chen sighed, but he was not surprised. How powerful were the cultivators of Dongxin? One person could fight against 10,000 soldiers. They could observe the sky and know the number of stars. With a raise of their hand they could move mountains and fill the sea. In the eyes of mortals they were like gods. It was probably unacceptable for anyone to turn from a powerful god to an ordinary person. It was reasonable that Elder Huang did not want to wake up and face this cruel reality. The middle-aged man said, I once advised him. Although the academy can help him condense his psyche power to cultivate, it is also a cage for him. He is trapped in this cage, enslaved by obsession and finally destroyed by obsession. Vice President Chen knew very well that the existence of the academy played a vital role in Elder Huang's cultivation. It was precisely because of this that he did not want to see the academy decline. Because if the academy declined, his cultivation would also be blocked. This was his selfishness. Unfortunately, the selfish Elder Huang met the selfless Li Mu. One was for his own cultivation, and the other was for the people and the foundation of the Great Zhou. This time even the heavenly path stood on Li Mu's side. The middle-aged man walked out of the room and said, I have been negligent in managing the academy for the past few years. Vice President Chen immediately said, It's all my fault. I only cared about their cultivation and schoolwork, but I neglected their morals. That's why the academy has developed such a bad trend. The middle-aged man said, The academy is a place to educate and cultivate talents for the Great Zhou. This is also the original intention of Emperor Wen when he established the academy. It's better not to participate in the affairs of the state. During the time of the previous emperor wantonly changed the laws and appointed people based on their own connections. This caused the Great Zhou's people to resent him and the imperial court to be in a foul mood. The previous emperor did not listen to advice, and many loyal officials and their families were killed. The Great Zhou was filled with internal troubles and external enemies were also restless. At that time, the 4 great academies appeared and completely suppressed the imperial court. They completely took away the power of the previous emperor. At that time, the ancestral temple did not give birth to the emperor's qi. The previous emperor's cultivation was only at the Dongxin realm, which was piled up by the resources of the royal family. In front of the 4 great academies, the Shao royal family had no room to resist. The previous emperor was greatly affected by this incident, and his cultivation did not improve. Instead, it regressed and he died in a few years. The Zhou family seized that opportunity and pushed the empress to the highest position. This time, the empress wanted to shake the foundations of the 4 great academies. The 4 great academies did not resist, not only because the empress was different from the previous emperor and had reached the transcendent realm. Perhaps, even the 4 great academies approved of the empress's actions. She quickly smiled and said, "Go ahead, I'll wait for you at home." Li Mu noticed her disappointment. He thought for a moment and asked Mr. Mei, "Can I take her with me?" Hearing this, Mr. Mei was stunned. He looked at Li Mu and saw that he didn't seem to be joking. He thought for a moment and nodded. "Yes, but when we enter the palace you have to stay by our side. You can't run around." Xiao Bai happily held Li Mu's arm and said, "I won't leave you, savior." With Xiao Bai following them, the atmosphere became much livelier. When they entered the palace, she held Li Mu's arm and looked around. She grew up in the mountains and was very surprised by the magnificent buildings that could be seen everywhere in the palace. The Hall of Secretariat was located in the palace, west of the Ziwei Palace. It was also known as the West Stage. Among the 3 provinces, the Hall of Secretariat was the decision-making body. It was in charge of important government affairs. All the policies of the Great Zhou were formulated by the Hall of Secretariat. Could be said that it was the think tank of the Great Zhou. To some extent, the Hall of Secretariat decided the path that the Great Zhou would take in the future. This was also the reason why the Empress gave the Hall of Secretariat the task of formulating the imperial examination policy. When Li Mu was brought to the gate of the Hall of Secretariat by Mr. Mei, an official was already waiting there. He first bowed to Mr. Mei and said, "Greetings, Mr. Mei." Mr. Mei said lightly, "I've brought Lord Li here. The Hall of Secretariat must treat him well. Do not neglect or offend him. If he delays important matters of the imperial examination, the Hall of Secretariat will be responsible." The official smiled bitterly and said, we wouldn't dare." He had seen the consequences of offending Li Mu in the Great Hall. No one wanted to be punished by the heavens. Moreover, they were asking for help this time so they wouldn't offend him. The Hall of Secretariat was a confidential place. Even the officials of the other departments couldn't easily enter. Mr. Mei went to Xiao Bai and said, "I'll take you to the front garden. The flowers there are very beautiful." Li Mu patted Xiao Bai's head and said, "Let Sister Mei take you to play first. When I'm done here I'll go find you." Xiao Bai nodded obediently. Mr. Mei took her away. The official from the Hall of Secretariat smiled at Li Mu and extended his hand. "Lord Li, please." Li Mu stepped into the Hall of Secretariat and asked, "How should I address you?" The official said, "I'm Lu Yi. I'm an official of the Hall of Secretariat." Li Mu couldn't help but look at this person a few more times. Looking at his appearance, he was in his 30s, about the same age as Zhang Chun. Li Mu originally thought that he would be the head of the Hall of Secretariat, but he didn't expect him to be an official of the Hall of Secretariat. An official of the Hall of Secretariat was only a 5th-rank official, the same as Zhang Chun. However, his position in the court was completely different. A 5th-rank Shindu token was dispensable in the court. If he didn't come to court, no one would notice. However, an official of the Hall of Secretariat was the backbone of the Hall of Secretariat. Most of the political affairs of the Great Zhou were discussed and decided by the 6 officials of the Hall of Secretariat. As long as there were no accidents, anyone who could become an official of the Hall of Secretariat would be a giant in the court in the future. The 2 of them walked into the Hall of Secretariat. When they passed through the long corridor on the right, a young man walked out from the side of the yamen. The man had a short beard and was handsome. He looked to be in his 30s. The wrinkles at the corners of his eyes showed that he wasn't as young as he looked. However, the vicissitudes of life brought by these wrinkles didn't reduce his charm. On the contrary, combined with his angular face, it added to his temperament. As a man, and a handsome one at that, Li Mu had to admit at first glance that this middle-aged man had a great temperament. Although they were both middle-aged, Zhang Chun was much more greasy. There wasn't a trace of grease on his body. When he walked on the street he could probably make some young girls and young women go crazy. This temperament of a mature man was something that Li Mu didn't have at the moment. Louis stopped and saluted the man. He said, "Assistant Minister Chui." The man looked at Li Mu beside him and asked, "Who is he?" As a confidential yamen, the Hall of Secretariat was in charge of confidential affairs and important government affairs. Therefore there were 4 special prohibitions. No leaking, no auditing, no breaking, no forgetting, and no outsiders were allowed to enter. Louis explained, "This is Li Mu, Lord Li. We invited him to work together on the strategy for the imperial examinations." Li Mu. The man looked at Li Mu and a strange look appeared in his eyes. He didn't say anything else and turned to walk into the yamen. The 2 of them continued to walk forward. Louis explained, "This is Assistant Minister Chui. He just returned to Shindu yesterday so he doesn't know Lord Li." "Assistant Minister Chui?" Li Mu stopped and asked, Which Assistant Minister Chui? Lu said, there is only one Assistant Minister Chui in the Hall of Secretariat. He is the left Assistant Minister Chui Ming, Princess Yunyang's son-in-law. Li Mu was silent for a moment before he smiled and said, Assistant Minister Chui, I've heard a lot about you. Chapter 262. Louis was surprised. Official Li knows about Assistant Minister Chui? Before Li Mu came to the capital, Assistant Minister Chui had left and only returned yesterday. There was no reason for him to know about Assistant Minister Chui. Li Mu smiled. Of course I know. I come from the North County. Assistant Minister Chui was a county magistrate there for a period of time. Even now there are still legends about him in the North County. No wonder. Louis seemed to have thought of something. Assistant Minister Chui is handsome and heroic. Everywhere he goes, countless girls go crazy for him. I didn't expect that after being in the capital for so long, there are still people in the North County who remember him. Li Mu had only heard of Chui Ming before. Now that he saw him, he knew how he could use women to rise up the ranks. This person's appearance and temperament were excellent. If he debuted in the future, he would easily attract a group of female fans who would call him hubby behind his back. Since ancient times, people's pursuit of appearance had never changed. No matter if it was a young girl or a young woman, it was hard to resist this temperament. Madame Chu, the daughter of the Jiujiang County Magistrate, and Princess Yunyang had all fallen into his hands. Li Mu wanted to use Lu to find out more about Chui Ming. He revealed a gossipy expression and said, I heard that Assistant Minister Chui had several marriages. Lu nodded. I also heard that Assistant Minister Chui was originally the son-in-law of the Jiujiang County Magistrate. Later, Assistant Minister Chui found out that the Jiujiang County Magistrate colluded with the demon sect. Assistant Minister Chui exposed his father-in-law to the imperial court. The Jiujiang County Magistrate's family was executed by the late emperor. Only Assistant Minister Chui was transferred to the capital because of his merit in exposing them. He shook his head. The Jiujiang County Magistrate's daughter was his first wife. Assistant Minister Chui was ruthless. Li Mu asked, how did Princess Yunyang and Assistant Minister Chui get together? Lu thought for a moment and said, at that time, Assistant Minister Chui was the head of the Secretariat and worked in the Imperial Secretariat. The Imperial Secretariat was in the palace, and Princess Yunyang often went to the palace. The two might have met by chance. Later, Princess Yunyang's husband died suddenly. After half a year, Assistant Minister Chui became the new husband. In the following 10 years, he was promoted from the head of the Secretariat to the head of the Imperial Secretariat. Li Mu still wanted to ask for more details, but Lu had already taken him into a yamen and introduced him to the people in the room. Everyone, Lord Li is here. 4 of the 5 officials in the yamen stood up and saluted Li Mu with cupped fists. Lu introduced them to Li Mu. These are the other 5 heads of the Imperial Secretariat. She escorted Li Mu from the North County to Shindu and took care of him. Li Mu had nothing to repay her, so he could only treat her to a simple meal to express his sincerity. This meant that he truly approved of her. Although Li Mu had promised Lu Hanyan that he wouldn't fool around after coming to Shindu, Lu Hanyan wasn't on the list of flowers that she was wary of. It was still early when they left the palace. Li Mu and Xiao Bai went to the East Market first and bought some flower seeds. Li Mu had 2 gardens at home, but he hadn't taken care of them. Since Xiao Bai liked them, he might as well plant flowers in them and wait for Lu Hanyan and Wanwan to come back. It could also add some decorations to the house. Li Mu, you're shopping too? A familiar voice came from behind. Li Mu turned around and saw Zhang Chun at the entrance of a flower shop not far behind him. There were 2 people beside him. They were both women. One was a woman in her 30s and the other was a thin woman. Li Mu was familiar with both of them. He could meet familiar faces while shopping with Xiao Bai. Li Mu held Xiao Bai's hand and walked forward. He smiled and said, Lord Zhang, Madame Zhang, Miss Yi, what a coincidence. The woman smiled and said, so it's Constable Li. Is this Madame Li? She's so beautiful. Zhang Chun's heart skipped a beat. He glared at the woman and said, she's not Madame Li, don't talk nonsense. Seeing Li Mu, the owner of the flower shop walked out and took a bag of flower seeds from the side. He said, "So you're Constable Li's friends. You should have said so earlier. I'll give you this bag of flower seeds." Zhang Chun was holding the precious flower seeds that he couldn't bear to buy just now. He was the Shendu magistrate, and in his jurisdiction he had to rely on his subordinate constable to take advantage of him. He felt a little jealous. Xiao Bai, Madame Zhang and her daughter went into the shop to pick out the flower seeds. Li Mu and Zhang Chun waited outside. Li Mu thought of Cui Ming and asked Zhang Chun, "Old Zhang, if someone in order to climb up the social ladder, killed his wife and threw her body in the wilderness. He also framed his wife's family and caused more than 10 people in her family to die in vain, what should we do? Such an animal is worse than meat. Of course we should," Zhang Chun said angrily. Before he finished, he suddenly woke up and looked at Li Mu. He asked cautiously, "Who are you talking about?" Li Mu said, "Cui Ming." "Who's Cui Ming?" Zhang Chun looked confused and asked, "Could it be the Cui family of the 9 families?" Li Mu shook his head and said, "No." "That's good." Zhang Chun puffed out his chest and said, "As long as it's not the Cui family of the 9 families, I don't care if he's a disciple of the academy or an official in the court. Whoever dares to do such an animal will be punished by me." "Your Excellency is indeed noble." He had to do his best to realize these 4 sentences and turn them into a Tao technique that belonged only to him. Perhaps, this was the opportunity for him to enter the upper realm in the future. Secondly, it was for Su He. He and Su He were sworn friends. Back in Yangqiu County in the North County, Li Mu had already made up his mind to avenge her. Even if she broke out of the formation, she was only a 5th realm soul cultivator. The divine capital was no different from a tiger's den to her. It was impossible for her to take revenge on her own. She would not even have the chance to see Cui Ming before she was captured by the powerhouses of the divine capital. It would be best if Li Mu could avenge her before Su He broke out of the formation. No matter the reason, Cui Ming had to die. Li Mu's eyes flashed while Zhang Chun's expression darkened. The two looked at each other and reached a tacit understanding. At this moment, the two of them shared a common enemy. 15 minutes later, Li Mu and Zhang Chun's family parted ways. Xiao Bai chose her favorite flower. The two of them went to the market to buy some vegetables and returned home. Xiao Bai went to the kitchen to prepare while Li Mu went to his room. He opened his palm and a white light flashed. Bai appeared in his hand. When Li Mu was concentrating, this was the first sword that Li Qing had given him. In battle, it could no longer provide any help to Li Mu. Only Mrs. Chu's sword spirit was of some use to him. Before advancing to the Abhijna level, Li Mu needed Mrs. Chu's spiritual power to perform Tao techniques that he could not perform. Li Mu had advanced to the Abhijna level with the help of the Empress. Bai was no longer of any use to him. All that was left was nostalgia. After parting at Yangqiu County, there was no news of Li Qing. After Fulu School's disciples advanced to the Abhijna level, they would go out to train. No one knew where she went. After holding Bai for a while, Li Mu composed himself. With a thought, Mrs. Chu's figure floated out of the sword. She bowed and said, "Young master, what are your orders?" After coming to the Immortals' capital, Li Mu did not let Mrs. Chu out. For the past 2 months, she had been sleeping in the sword to recover her soul. Li Mu said, "I saw Cui Ming today." Upon hearing Cui Ming's name, Mrs. Chu's originally gentle face suddenly became ferocious. Ghostly qi surrounded her body and she said in a sad voice, "Where is that bastard? I want to kill him." Li Mu shook his head and said, "He is now the emperor's son-in-law. He holds an important position in the court and has a high position. His cultivation has also reached the 5th level. You can't kill him. You will only die if you go." Upon hearing this, Mrs. Chu's emotions gradually calmed down. She shook her head and said self-deprecatingly, "I couldn't kill him when he was alive and I still can't kill him when I'm dead." Li Mu said, "Cui Ming is a heartless person. I must kill him. When the time comes, I may need your help. After Cui Ming is dead, I will return your freedom. When the time comes, you can go wherever you want." Mrs. Chu suddenly raised her head and asked, "Young master, you really want to kill Cui Ming?" Li Mu nodded. Mrs. Chu knelt on the ground and said firmly, "As long as I can kill Cui Ming, even if my soul is scattered, I am willing." My only wish is to die after him. After more than 20 years, Li Mu could still feel the hatred in Mrs. Chu's heart. It was a pity that she didn't meet Li Mu before she died. Otherwise, she would have attracted the attention of heaven and earth and become a peerless evil spirit. After telling Mrs. Chu about this, Li Mu asked her to enter Bai. Then he put Bai away and walked out of the room. He planned to go to the kitchen to help Xiao Bai. Just as he walked into the courtyard, there was a knock on the door. Li Mu felt Mr. Mei's aura. He didn't expect her to really come for a free meal. He opened the door and found that Mr. Mei wasn't the only one. Mr. Mei and Shangguan Li were standing behind a woman. Li Mu saw the woman and said in surprise, "Your Majesty?" The Empress said, "I came out of the palace in plain clothes. Your Majesty isn't here." Li Mu scratched his head and asked tentatively, "Then how should I address Your Majesty, Miss Zhou?" Shangguan Li said angrily, "How dare you?" The Empress said, "This isn't the palace. You can call me whatever you want." Li Mu glanced at Shangguan Li. If he hadn't come to Luoyang a few years later, she wouldn't have the right to speak. In terms of protecting the Empress, she was more comprehensive than Li Mu. She was the Empress's bootlicker. Li Mu extended his hand and said, "Miss Zhou, your presence brings light to my humble abode. Please come in." He didn't know why the Empress came to his house in plain clothes, but he couldn't ask directly. He could only invite her in first. Just as the Empress sat down, there was another knock on the door. Li Mu had a puzzled look on his face. Usually, other than him and Little White as well as Lord Mei, who occasionally conveyed the Empress's decree, no one else would come to the house. What had happened today? Li Mu opened the door and saw Zhang Chun standing outside. Zhang Chun stood outside the Li residence with a gloomy face. He had made an appointment with Li Mu to discuss Cui Ming in the Luoyang Yamen in the afternoon. However, after returning home, his wife had mentioned Cui Ming many times. The speaker didn't mean it, but the listener took it seriously. The more Zhang Chun thought about it, the angrier he got. He felt a faint green light above his head. He didn't even have lunch at home. Instead, he went out to discuss with Li Mu. He stepped into the Li residence and said, "Have you finished cooking? Give me a bowl and chopsticks." I. He looked up and saw 3 figures standing in the yard. His voice stopped abruptly. Chapter 265. Zhang Chun seemed to have something to do. She left without entering the door. Li Mu closed the door again and returned to the courtyard. He had originally planned to start cooking with Xiao Bai. However, the Empress had suddenly arrived, and her intentions were unknown. He couldn't possibly be busy with his own matters and leave the Empress and the others here. Li Mu walked behind the Empress and stood quietly, trying to guess her intentions. Then he realized that he couldn't guess it at all. A woman's heart was like a needle at the bottom of the ocean. Li Mu could guess what Xiao Bai and Wan Wan were thinking. However, the Empress's thoughts were even harder to guess than Lu Hanyan's. This was because she had 2 personalities. One was the dignified and serious Empress, and the other was Li Mu's nightmare with unparalleled whip skills. The Empress stood in the courtyard with her back facing Li Mu. She asked, "Are you used to living in this house?" Li Mu nodded and said, "It's just a little big. It's troublesome to clean it up." The Empress turned to look at him and said, "I gave you a maid, but you didn't want her. If you don't like the size of this house, I'll change it to a smaller one for you." Li Mu hurriedly said, "No need, no need. I'll get used to it. As long as you like it." A big house with 5 entrances was Zhang Chun's lifelong goal. Who would complain that their own house was too big? Li Mu and Xiao Bai lived in such a big house. Naturally, it was a little big. However, Lu Hanyan and Wan Wan hadn't returned yet. If there was a new addition to the family in the future, the house with 5 entrances might still seem small. The Empress asked this question and didn't say anything else. Li Mu waited for her to go somewhere else. However, they didn't seem to have any intention of leaving. Li Mu asked tentatively, "Xiao Bai and I are preparing to cook. Your Majesty, Mr. Mei and Master Shangguan, do you want to have a meal here before you leave?" This was obviously the intention of sending them off. As the ruler of a nation, the Empress would not and could not possibly stay for a meal here. This did not match her identity and status. Li Mu even suspected that she didn't need to eat on a daily basis. Li Mu, who was in the transcendent realm, could already abstain from eating. Did the transcendent realm feed on the spiritual energy of heaven and earth and the essence of the sun and moon? The Empress sat down on the stone chair and said, "Okay." Li Mu was dumbfounded. Couldn't she tell that he was sending her off? If a guest suddenly came to stay for dinner, she should tactfully refuse. Wasn't this a traditional virtue of Great Zhou? Li Mu asked. We haven't started preparing yet. The meal should take a long time. Will it delay His Majesty's handling of state affairs? Shangguanli said, the imperial court has 3 provinces, 6 ministries and 24 divisions. Chapter 266. Li Mu had no one in the Secretariat, but as the advisor of the Secretariat, he had a lot of say in the reform of the Great Zhou's official selection system. If the Empress was involved in Cui Ming's case, things would become even more complicated. If he could infiltrate the Imperial Clan Temple, everything would become legitimate. The formulation of this Imperial examination policy was the best opportunity. He would go to the Secretariat tomorrow. Today he would help Xiao Bai to guard her and let her complete the transformation from a demon fox to a spirit fox. Night. Li residence. The young girl sat cross-legged on the bed. Li Mu sat cross-legged behind her. His 2 hands were pressed against her back, continuously transferring the mana in his body into her body. The cork of the crystal bottle placed in front of the bed suddenly opened. The bright red blood flew out of the bottle and entered Xiao Bai's body. These few drops of black fox blood essence contained a large amount of spiritual power. After fusing with Xiao Bai's blood, it made the blood in her body boil and a large amount of white gas emitted from her body. Li Mu used all his mana to help her refine the few drops of black fox blood essence. The young girl's delicate little face was frowning. She bit her lips lightly as if she was enduring great torture. In her body the black fox blood essence was constantly resisting. However, it soon seemed to have sensed something and gradually became gentle. It began to completely merge with her blood. Li Mu also noticed the piece of the black fox blood. These few drops of blood should have sensed the aura of its race. The few drops of blood essence no longer resisted, and the refining process became much easier. Xiao Bai could do it alone. Li Mu had just retracted his hand when he suddenly felt a few fluffy things in his arms. He looked down and found 4 white tails. When a fox demon evolved, it would grow an extra tail. If it could not maintain a complete human form, its tail would appear. Li Mu sat cross-legged behind Xiao Bai. Her tail reached into Li Mu's arms. She used to have 3 tails. Now that she had 4 tails, it meant that she had successfully advanced. The young girl turned around and looked at Li Mu, her charming eyes like silk. Benefactor, I have advanced to 4-tailed. Her beautiful face and enchanting eyes seemed to want to suck Li Mu's soul out of his body. Li Mu recited the clear heart incantation to get rid of her charm. He reached out and knocked on her forehead saying, "Don't charm me." The young girl covered her head and said with grievance, "I didn't." Her pitiful expression made Li Mu's heart flutter again. Li Mu jumped off the bed, arched his back and fled. He said, "I'm going to cultivate in seclusion. Tonight you sleep in your own room." Li Mu fled back to his room and lay on his bed. His heart was still thumping. The charm of a spirit fox was already so powerful. Since ancient times, the officials of the Zongjing Temple have always been members of the royal family. In the past, it was not given to the students of the 4 academies. Li Mu shook his head and said, as the most important system of the imperial court in the future, under the imperial examinations, no matter if it is the 3 provinces, 6 ministries or 9 temples, they must all be treated equally. The Zongjing Temple is no exception. Xiao Ziyu said decisively, I object. This is an ancestral system. The ancestral system cannot be abolished. Lu Yi and the others did not speak. Although the Xiao clan was not entirely part of the royal family of the Great Zhou had a deep relationship with the Xiao clan of the 9 families. They had common interests, so naturally they would not give up control of the Zongjing Temple. Lu Yi and the others continued to remain silent. To them, whether the Xiao clan controlled the Zongjing Temple or not did not make much of a difference. There was no need for them to interfere. The Zhou clan and the Xiao clan had been fighting in the imperial court for 3 years. Although Zhou Xiong hated Li Mu, he supported him unconditionally on this matter. However, Li Mu had already said that if he did not speak, he would not interfere. His lips moved a few times, but in the end he did not speak. Seeing that no one spoke, Li Mu looked at Zhou Xiong and said, Zhou Sharon, say something. You said so much just now. Why have you become mute? Zhou Xiong's chest rose and fell. He swallowed his anger and said, I agree with what Lord Li said. The various ministries of the imperial court should be treated equally. Why is the Zongjing Temple an exception? Xiao Ziyu said, the officials of the Zongjing Temple have always been members of the royal family. This was a rule set by the great ancestor. Li Mu smiled and said, if the officials of the Zongjing Temple are all members of the royal family, then the ones in charge of the Zongjing Temple should be the Zhou clan. Lord Zhou, don't you think so? Li Mu hit the nail on the head. Xiao Ziyu could not refute him. Lord Li's words are reasonable. Zhou Xiong quickly agreed. When he looked at Li Mu again, he found that he did not seem as annoying as before. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.